Welcome to the Fancy Breeds compilation episode that we put together here for you. We got some great interviews with some amazing fanciers. And I know I say this at the beginning of all the compilation episodes, but if you've already listened to the other two, the one on rollers and the one on racers, and you're here already, then I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but you already know you can always learn something regardless of what side of the hobby you're participating in. There's always something to learn from listening to other people who are in different parts of the hobbies. Keep that in mind when you listen. And when this episode comes out, we're going to be pretty much in the beginning part of the show season, so be a good time to throw this on while you're doing a bit of driving, going in between the shows. Or however you listen, just get comfortable. It's going to be a little bit longer than our typical 30-minute episodes, so let's go ahead and get into it right now. This episode of the All About Pigeons podcast is brought to you by the Rare Breeds Pigeon Club, an international organization dedicated to preserving and promoting the world's rarest pigeon breeds. The RBPC works to protect genetic diversity, support fanciers around the globe, and keep these unique breeds from fading into history. You can learn more about their mission, explore their full rare breed list, or become a member by visiting rarepigeons.net. Check them out and help support the future of rare pigeons worldwide. Hello, and welcome to the All About Pigeons podcast. We have a very special episode for you today, so stick around. Today we have with us Danford M. Pugh Jr., Spud as he is known to his friends and pigeon breeders. Spud began breeding pigeons at the age of 8 and started showing pigeons at local fairs with 4-H and FFA in high school. He attended his first NPA Grand National in Portland, Oregon in 1988. He's graduated summa cum laude from Mississippi State University in 1996 with a bachelor's degree in poultry science. He worked in poultry production from 1997 to 2014 and started breeding Indian Fantails again in 2010. The summer of 2014, Spud worked at the Palmetto Pigeon plant in Sumter, South Carolina, and there he met Dr. Wendell Levi Jr. By 2018, he had become a certified judge for Indian Fantails and was awarded the IFCA Master Breeder Award at the age of 45. Spud has judged Indian Fantails at the NPA Grand National, the National Youngbird Show, Pigeons on the Prairie, the Reading Pigeon Association Show, the Salt Lake Premier, Virginia Pigeon and Dove Association, Dubai UAE, Sadra UAE, and the Indian Fantail Club of India show. This winter, he will be traveling to Bahrain and Saudi Arabia to judge Indian Fantails at each of their club's national shows. Spud is the past president of the Indian Fantail Club of America and currently serves as the secretary treasurer of that club. And today, we're going to talk about Indian Fantails. And Spud, thank you so much for coming on and doing this with us today.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
Can we talk about your nickname first? How did you go from Danford to Spud? I don't see the abbreviation there.
Well, since I'm a junior, I was obviously born during Vietnam. My father was stationed on an Air Force base in Idaho. The four previous generations of my family were all from the western side of Colorado. And since I was a junior, my grandmother just decided it'd be easier to call me Spud rather than to have two sons in the family. So I got the name Spud since I was born in Idaho, and it stuck. And honestly, I like it.
Yeah, there you go. It works. We kind of talked about, you've done pigeons in 4-H and FFA as a kid. When did you first start getting into the Indian Fantails?
So I'm thinking that I found Indian Fantails perhaps at the age of 10 or 11.
Okay.
I got started with Indian Fantails after I discovered a picture of two birds in a pigeon book that I purchased from a pet store. It was written by a man named Mervyn F. Roberts, and I believe he was from California. And on page 16, there was a picture of a ribbon tail and a tail mark Indian Fantail it's really an iconic picture. They were taken by our club founder, Harvey Gatlin. As soon as I saw those birds, I wanted a pair, and I asked my mother to help me. And she found a gentleman that lived in Denver, Colorado, who all I can remember now is his first name. His name was Frank, and he got me 3 pairs. Later on, I started getting the American Pigeon Journal, and I became introduced to Frank German, who was, I think, the club secretary at that time. And he introduced me to a gentleman named Gary Glissmeyer and one named Ron Ewing, who are both master breeders, I believe, in our club. And for Christmas, I think probably around the sixth grade, Ron sent me six Indian fantails that even today could be shown. They were really, really beautiful birds. And then a few years later, I got another box of birds from a gentleman in Texas named James Anderson, that were probably the best colored almonds I've ever seen. So from a very early age, the adult members of the Indian Fantail Club of America mentored me and really set me on a good path.
That's good that you had that there as a resource. I mean, it's mentorship is so huge and can help, from people getting started and being discouraged. And that sounds like you had, I mean, if you had some master breeders of the breed helping you, that's a great way to start.
The master breeders of the breed helped me again later when I got back into them as an adult. So
Yeah.
I can't say enough good about the breeders of the Indian Fantail Club of America. They've just been wonderful to me.
And then can you give us a breakdown and what's the origin and history behind this breed?
Absolutely. So, if you look in the Encyclopedia of Pigeon Breeds or the Pigeon by Wendell Levi, you'll find that the Indian Fantail is the oldest breed of fantail pigeon. Written records of the bird back to the Akbar dynasty in India, which was approximately 1500 to 1608. A writer by the name of Abul Fazl described the bird in 1590 in writing. In the local languages in India, it's called the peacock tail pigeon. In France, they call it the same thing. They call it the peacock tail pigeon, which goes back to the Akbar dynasty. Interestingly, the Indian Fantail Club of India, the members there stated that their oral tradition suggests that the breed might have come to India actually from Egypt. Our founding father, Harvey Gatlin, who's been mentioned on your podcast before, wrote in I think it was in the American Pigeon Journal, that there are hieroglyphics with images of the bird in the tombs of Egypt.
Oh,
I've
wow,
reached
that's
out to
awesome.
some of my friends. Yeah, it is. I've reached out to some of my friends in the Middle East to confirm that, but I haven't yet. So that's something I'd like to do. I think I'd like to find out if that's really honestly the truth, and I'd love to have a way to know that they are actually shown in the Egyptian pyramids.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. Also, according to our club documents, we have a history that was written by Dr. Dave Deal, who lives in Texas. Our documents indicate that the birds came to the West Coast as snake food from India to the San Diego Zoo around 1927. There's also some documents in a personal library of Eric Cooker in Pennsylvania that state that there were booted and crested fantails in the U.S. East Coast prior to 1900. One of our founding members, Tony Brancato, started his line of Indian fantails on the East Coast by using those muffed and crested birds, bred them together, and essentially created the same thing. And then Tony and Harvey Gatlin came together and formed our club in 1963.
That's interesting. So they're the original. I mean, I could see Mindians coming from pretty easily. So even the standard fantails have been started from that breed, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. According to Levi's writings and anything else you can find, and I think there's even some documentation back into the 1700s
Hmm.
that all say that the fantail breeds originated in India. And another thing that's interesting, you brought up the Mindians haven't traveled to India. In India, there's two distinct breeds. One's a showbird like we show in the United States, and some of the best examples there are just as good as ours are.
Hmm.
But they also have a bird they call the jumbo. And the jumbo Indian, if you look online and find pictures of it, is an absolutely enormous bird, but it can't hold its tail up. The feathers are so long they just drag on the ground behind it.
Oh, wow. I have to look that one up. That sounds neat.
You know, when you talk about India, it's interesting. Our Indian Fantail Club of America has 83 members.
Hmm.
The Indian Fantail Club of India's Facebook site has 54,000
Oh,
members.
wow.
So the hobby in that country is completely different than what it is here.
Yeah. And I've heard from a couple of different fanciers and judges that go to India. They say that the fancy show side of things is really growing over there too.
It is, and what I found when I was there is that there's a lot of professional people that are involved, school principals, financial people. It's really interesting. There's a lot of well-educated, well-meaning people that are involved in their club, and they're working really hard to really be the home of the Indian fantail for sure in the future.
So you mentioned that the Mindian is the same back and forth between the two, and you're going to be going over there to judge. Is there any difference in the standard between the USA standard, like the standard in India, or the standard in like Saudi Arabia or Bahrain?
That's a great question. So I think throughout the world, outside of continental Europe, most everyone uses the same standard as the Indian Fantail Club of America.
Okay.
The Indian Fantail Club and the two clubs in the United Arab Emirates both use our same standard. From what I can tell, looking at birds in Europe, and I'm not familiar with their standard, but they appear to be bred a little differently with more emphasis on color than we place on color in our standard. So the European birds are definitely, they have really beautiful, clean colors, and they've really excelled at that. And if you're into really nice, clean colors, Europe's the place to go.
So what are the breed specific physical characteristics and features, especially when it comes to judging and the point system? What are the big things that you're looking for as a judge?
Okay, when you're judging the bird, it's broken down. The standard's broken down in points, and the tail is allotted 20 points,
Mhm.
and then the stance is allotted 20 points. So the first 40 points of the standard are talking about the shape and the position of the tail, and then how the bird stands, and it's supposed to stand parallel to the ground so that the flights and the wing feathers in front are almost level to the ground. And that really, those two things alone set it apart from other breeds, and especially apart from other breeds of fantails. I think the most obvious thing that really makes an Indian fantail an Indian fantail is when you look at it, it looks like a little turkey.
Yeah, I've heard that so many times. That's funny.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely, yeah.
And when I go to shows, especially people that haven't seen them in several years, if they come to a show or if they're a new person, when they walk up to the Indian fantails, they say, "Well, they're huge. They're just enormous." That truly is the case. I mean, your average pigeon's between what, 12 and 14 ounces. I'd say our average show-winning Indian today is between 20 and 30, and I have one hen that's over 40.
Wow. Yeah, that's
So they really are a very big bird.
yeah. What's the temperament of that breed? I mean, are they pretty docile, easy to handle, or they do a good job raising their own? And
I'll tell you, for starters, the show lines of Indian fantails,
mhm.
a lot of them don't fly at all. My birds, even though I offer them perches, won't go any higher than the top of their feeder. They're ground ridden. They've been selected for multiple generations to stand quietly, and that's really what they should do. They should just hold still, hold their tail up, and be real calm. Sometimes that's more difficult to achieve than what one would like, but they're really a very mild pigeon, and I will say that at this point they don't have any sense of self-preservation whatsoever. So they're not a bird that you can let out and expect to survive very long at all, because predators eat them right up.
So you have to kind of keep everything down low than in your loft for these birds?
Well, that's a great question. So I breed in individual breeding pens, and I built those so that they're up off the ground where I can get into them fairly easily. But I give them a lot of space. So I like for my Indian breeders to have at least 9 square feet of space per pair, and I prefer 16 square feet. I sent you a video you can download on Facebook, and it'll show my individual breeding pens, and I give a little bit of a narrative of why I use them. But mine are based on a design that Harvey Adengast, one of our master breeders, came up with, and I went to his house and found that I really liked his ideas, so I continued with them.
Yeah, that's a lot of space for the birds right there. Is the space just for more successful breeding or
It really is. So I used to let the Indian fantails breed by themselves. And I got to the point probably about 2015 where I was averaging two babies per hen per year. And I decided to take a friend's advice and get some feeders. So I got some domestic flight crosses that had been handed down from the East Coast. And I immediately went from two babies per hen per year to eight babies per hen per
oh
year.
wow, that's a jump.
Yeah. So, and I think as I talk to the other breeders in the club, the people that have the most success will either partially use feeders or pumpers, whichever you want to call them, or they'll rely on them exclusively. I rely on my feeders exclusively, but another thing that I do in breeding that's kind of important to realize that this is somewhat different than what other people do is I rotate probably 20 to 30 hens on just 12 outstanding cocks. So I never breed from more than 12 cocks. And I have a system that I learned from a racing homer breeder where I use the bull system to rotate hens on those cocks, and I'm a lot more successful because of it.
Okay, well, that was one of the things I wanted to talk to you about too. Is compared to homers, which they just reproduce like crazy in any kind of situation. I mean, I'd almost say all fancy birds, right, are a little bit kind of a little more specific to meeting needs, like you're saying, give them more space and things like that. Are there any other tips that you can tell people raising this breed or any kind of fancy breed for to help them with breeding systems? Before I guess the breeding season's almost over, but for the future.
I wish I could give some advice to for other breeds, but I really don't have any. I did learn one thing very early from Bill Griebel, who's a color pigeon breeder from California. I called him on the phone, and he suggested a perch board inside an individual breeding pen,
Mhm.
where you put a bowl on top and one on bottom and let the birds choose, and then whenever they move to their second set of eggs, they'll just go to the other nest bowl, and then they'll be away from their babies. That worked really well for me when my Indians were still able to take care of their own young. But as I've selected toward bigger tails, longer muffs, and bigger bodies, they've gotten to the point where the females absolutely won't take care of their young. One of the things that I've seen other people do that seems to be fairly successful, if they breed in an open loft, they don't keep their Indian fantails with any other breed, and they let them breed on the ground because very rarely will the bigger birds fly any higher than about 2 feet to a nest box. My mentor, his name's Doc Larson. He lives in Virginia and he's retired now. He came here from California. When he quit breeding, he had several lofts that were I'm going to say between 100 and 200 square feet each. And he would put between 2 and 6 pairs of birds in each one of those lofts, and they did just fine taking care of their babies. He just gave them plenty of space, and they laid on the floor and raised their babies on the floor, and he didn't seem to have a lot of problems that way. Another really good breeder in the Midwest does the same thing, Ted Golka, and he raises plenty of very outstanding birds. Just let them lay eggs on the floor. I will tell you this: if you get into this breed and decide to let them raise their babies on the floor, they are going to lay their eggs right in front of the door. So
Oh,
have doors that open out.
and watch your step, yeah.
Yeah, yes.
Because I've always heard too with fantails that you always want to trim those back tails so that way they can have more successful breeding and less infertile eggs. Is that something that you do?
Absolutely. I birdscape them.
How short do you go, and do you just cut the whole back off, or just
So on the females, I grab the tail feathers as close to the skin as I can, and then I trim them just as close as I can without nipping the birds. Then I trim the muffs down as far as I can, and the hawk feathers, because the all the feathers on an Indian fantail is you select for length of tail feathers. All the other feathers get longer as well, especially the hawk feathers. If you watch the birds walk around, they'll curl behind them and they'll actually cover the vent. I trim the muffs, the hawks. I trim the vents very well. The females, I trim the entire fan off so that they look more like a Modena when you get done with them.
yeah, I guess that's right. Yeah, they got the big body still.
Yes, and then the males, I trim the side feathers about 6 or 8 up both sides because they need that tail to balance when they're trying to mate. And I think one of the reasons that I raise so many youngsters is because I do breed in individuals. When you breed in colonies with Indian fantails, they have a real hard time with their balance, especially the males with the big long tails. And they have a heck of a time making it work. And if other males come over and try to compete with them while they're trying to mate, you don't get a lot of fertile eggs.
So that makes a lot of sense too. About I never thought about some of like the hawk feathers still blocking the vent and trimming the muffs and everything else. That makes sense.
Yeah, it can be a real issue.
Do you have any other kind of specific requirements for a loft with this kind of breed? Or I mean, you can't really get it too high for them, but is there anything else?
Well, I'd like to share maybe a better piece of advice if you'd like.
Yeah.
I've watched several new people come and go into our club through the years and watched a lot of people get frustrated.
Hmm.
I would say before you start with Indian or mini Indian fantails, something if you're going to get serious about it, before you even build a loft, I would go and visit two or three people that show competitively and see how their loft's put together. And then I would also choose birds from one person and try to emulate their system. I've found when I started back with Indian Fantails in 2010, I got strains from four different people. And there was one that worked extremely well on my loft, and I really stuck with it and bred the others into it. But it had come from another breeder that used individual breeding pen. It's almost like you select the bird into the system rather than vice versa, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you have a preference with this breed as far as open loft versus individual? I mean, you must, I guess, lean towards individual, since how that's what you do.
Yeah, I have 18 individual breeding pens that have slatted floors. And then I have some solid floor breeding pens that I usually just use to get birds ready for show in. So the slatted floors work really, really good. I live in the southeast where it's really humid and moist, and we have a very aggressive worm problem here. Slatted floors work really good to keep the worm challenge down and to keep the loft dry. And that's how I prefer to breed. However, when you're getting a bird with big muffs ready for show, they'll get broken off on a slatted floor. So I like to get their muffs ready on a solid floor.
Okay, so that's for your when you're getting them ready for a show. Then the separate loft that you're using for that conditioning is just a solid flat floor. Then
Absolutely.
no chips down on the floor, nothing like that.
Well, I do two layers. So I do a layer of sand on the bottom and then a layer of fine pine shavings on top. And by fine, I mean it's just a little bit bigger than sawdust.
Oh, okay.
And I've just found that that's very, very absorbent. There's times here I've been in this part of North Carolina where I've gotten 13 inches of rain in a single day. So it can be really, really wet. In my mind, and based on my professional experience, the one thing that's harder on birds than anything else is wet spots. So if I have a wet spot in my loft, I'll stay awake until I completely remove that wet spot and replace it with something dry.
Is there any kind of specific health issues that are associated with this breed?
I would say yes. So we've selected them to be such a show bird, and they're so stupid that they they have a tough time. There's several strains that don't fight off diseases very well, and I talk with other breeders that use a lot of antibiotic programs. They just seem to be really weak. And another thing that I'll caution you on is if people want to breed the breed, making sure that the nest bowls stay dry all the time is essential. When I'm raising a youngster, from the time it hatches until it's weaned, I change the nest out at least three and sometimes five times because they'll break their muff feathers off and then they'll get infections in the ends of those muff feathers and it'll ruin their feet. I think also as a club, we've kind of developed our own vaccination program where we vaccinate for PMV before the shows, and then we vaccinate for paratyphoid or Salmonella typhimurium once before the shows, and then once right before we put the birds together in the spring. And everyone that I've talked to that's done that has said that their fertility and their hatchability has increased dramatically the year that they started injecting the birds with that killed Bactrin for Salmonella typhimurium right before they started breeding. The idea there is that the birds make titers or antibodies to the vaccine or the disease. You're trying to get those as high as you possibly can right before they start breeding so that they'll pass those antibodies through the egg into the newborn chicks.
We've talked back and forth about that before, so that does happen. Then they will pass antibodies to the next generation. Then
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's just That's well, for lack of a better term, that's kind of poultry diseases 101 for people that are educated in the field. The one of the ways you make progeny strong is to expose the adults to the things that they're going to fight prior to them being born.
Oh yeah, well, that makes sense.
Absolutely, it does.
So are they, would you say this breed would be something good for, someone who's kind of coming into the fancy, or would this be more of the experienced breeders kind of stepping up their game for another breed right there? Or-
Well, my suggestion would be if you really see some pictures of Indian fantails and you think that there's something you'd like, I would start with the mini Indians. The mini Indians can fly. They breed very well, and a lot of the breeders of the minis don't even trim them. They're really prolific, and as far as I can tell, everybody that the group of people that breeds the mini Indians are really enthusiastic about it, and you can get a hold of those for really pennies on the dollar compared to good Indians. You can get good mini Indians for literally 10% the value of a good Indian fantail in some cases.
And there is a, you mentioned it before, and you're an officer in it. So there's the Indian Fantail Club, and that's here in the U.S.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then is there a Facebook page associated with that group, or?
Yeah, it's called the Indian North America Indian Fantail Club, I believe. But yes, we do have a Facebook page, and what I've found is there's a few of us from the U.S. that post in it pretty regularly, but it gets a lot of traffic from overseas as well. There's a lot of enthusiasm globally for the breed.
Or the breeds that have clubs really are more successful because they have that resource of these experienced breeders, and you can get that mentorship and guidance along the way if you're just getting started with it. So that would definitely be something to check out if someone's interested in that breed.
Yeah, and if they got on there and asked to join, obviously we'll let them and we can point them into the direction of the breeders that are in their part of the country.
Is it kind of heavier on the East Coast or West Coast? Or-
That's a great question. I'd really say the Midwest is kind of a hot spot for Indian fantails, kind of Iowa, Missouri, South Dakota. There's a group in Utah and Idaho, and another one in California. That California has always been a hot spot for Indian fantails. Right now on the East Coast, we've had a whole bunch of members through COVID that we lost, and we've had several others that have retired. And for me, it's just personally, it's been really heartbreaking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're in the fair season right now too, so everybody should be getting out and showing whatever breeds you have there at the fairs. And we got the NPA Grand National coming up here at the January over in Oklahoma City, and then are you going to be judging at the Young Bird Show then in Louisville?
No, I will be showing. I have a show team prepared for Louisville. Paul Tapia, one of our master breeders from Albuquerque, New Mexico, will be the judge, and his twin brother, Peter, is going to judge the West England Tumblers.
So you got some birds right now that you've already picked out and started conditioning for the show.
Yeah, I have a total of 15 that I'm looking at. I'll probably end up with about 8 or 10 ready to go to the show.
Well, is there anything else that you would like to say to all the pigeon fanciers out there? And
Can I take a couple minutes to make one last
yeah, please
statement?
do. Please do.
Okay. I'm really an exceptionally blessed person. I grew up with parents that kindled my love of pigeons, and I had teachers and college professors who really helped me learn all I could. My spouse and children take care of my loft when I'm gone and when I travel internationally. And without all these people, my passion for these birds would be impossible. When I was a young child, I saw my first pigeon land on an air conditioner, and it was a Saxon shield pigeon. I was riding a bike. And when I saw that bird with its white body and its black wings and the white wing bars and the muffed feet, I knew that God and man had worked together to create that bird. And that instant, my mind was really open so I could learn. And the real gift that I received from that moment was an understanding that no matter how much I was able to learn, I was always going to be incapable of understanding what all God's secrets with the pigeon and with life are. I feel like God used that experience to give me a yearning to learn about pigeons. And that experience has been a guiding force in my life ever since then. I've found that when I blindly follow where the pigeon leads me, I get to learn about other places, cultures, and ideas that help change me for the better. And my hope is that someone else hears this and that they're inspired to learn more about pigeons too. God's used the pigeon to help me turn toward the light my entire life. And I hope that anybody who listens to this will consider making that same decision.
That's awesome, man. That's beautiful. Oh, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
It always amazes me, if you think about all the different breeds there are. What do they say? Over 600 breeds that humans have been able to keep this going. There's some guy that's just focused on this, and in that loft he's had that, and that's more than just I mean, I would say it's even more than a hobby in some ways to keep these breeds all going. The dedication and everything that it pulls out of the people to keep them going. It's really amazing that we've been able to do that for so long.
It really is, and I was raised in a very much middle class family, and I didn't travel outside of the United States until I was an adult. Going into other parts of the world and seeing how they raise pigeons is an eye-opening experience. And I would encourage anybody who listens to you that gets the opportunity to judge, especially in the Middle East, to go check it out and see what it's all about because there is so much to learn. They just and the cultures are so good at teaching you.
Yeah, especially the Middle East too. They're steeped in that pigeon history. A lot of breeds you hear about their origins. A lot of them are coming out of there.
When I went to the Middle East, I saw breeds I didn't even know existed. I'd never seen them in pictures or books before.
Well, I'm gonna look up that jump. What is it called? The jumbo? I'm
Yeah,
gonna look up
they in the
jumbo
India
here.
they just call them jumbos. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
that's
they're
fascinating.
they're all over in India. I mean, they're in the pet stores and
Huh.
on the sides of the road in cages, and you see as many as those as you do chickens. It's amazing.
I'll have to check that out. Yeah. So when this comes out, we'll definitely be posting on our Facebook some videos that Spud sent of his loft and of his pigeons and some of the things that we've been speaking about in this episode. So you can kind of get some visual along with that follows along with the episode here. Spud, thanks so much for coming on and talking with us today. This has been really enlightening, and thanks for all your efforts to keep the fancy going.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I'm glad that you all reached out and let me talk about Indian Fantails. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the All About Pigeons podcast. Please help the pigeon hobby by telling your fellow club members or other pigeon friends about the podcast, and make sure to leave a good review or at least a 5-star for the podcast wherever you listen. If you have a topic or a person you want to hear more about on the podcast, or if you yourself would like to be a guest, just send an email to allaboutpigeonspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Hello, and welcome to the All About Pigeons podcast. We have a very special episode for you today, so stick around. Today, we're going to be talking about the breed Old German Owl with Bill Henderson. Bill has been raising pigeons for over 50 years. He is a master breeder in the NPA, that's the National Pigeon Association, and in the Old German Owl Club. In the past, he has been the Eastern Vice President of the Old German Owl Club and is also a judge of the Old German Owl breed. So, Bill, thanks so much for coming on and talking Old German Owls with us today.
I'm happy to do it. I always enjoy talking about them.
So, been in pigeons for 50 years. Can you talk about your journey into pigeons and specifically how you got into Old German Owls?
When I was a kid, there was a gentleman down the street from my grandmother that raised pigeons. He had them on top of his garage, and I was just mesmerized by him. He's in Wendell Levy's book, The Pigeon, in the Syrian breed section. His name was Sam Shadid. He was a Syrian immigrant, and he had brought all these different breeds of pigeons with him when he came to the United States. And I used to go down the street. I'd kind of hide behind some bushes and just watch the pigeons fly and interact with each other. Of course, he knew I was there. And he ultimately gave me a pair of what's called Sabuni tumblers. They're very rare in this country. But I took them home. I was 7 years old, had a little coop that my dad put together for me, and I have literally had them ever since. That was in Norfolk, Virginia. I've relocated a number of times when my father took on a new position. The pigeon hobby would stay with me, and I've had them ever since. Even during college, I didn't have them for a couple of years in college, but I lived in a duplex the last 2 years and actually had a little pigeon coop behind that duplex where I had them. I've had a lot of different breeds over the years and enjoyed them. I guess I became a serious breeder, so to speak, where I started to specialize and get more competitive. Back in the 80s, I became involved with the American Show Racer, which is a great breed. They were very popular at the time and very competitive. Being involved with that breed really taught me how to condition and breed pigeons and to show them. I was fortunate enough to become a master breeder in them. Unfortunately, that breed is not as productive, or they certainly weren't at that time. They had a lot of health issues, and I became frustrated because I only like to breed from a small number of pairs, 6 to 8 pairs each year, and I just wasn't producing enough young birds to be competitive. And I sort of stumbled onto the West of England Tumblers and had them for about 15 years, and that's a great breed. I thoroughly enjoyed them. Again, got very serious about them. Got my master breeder in them. Traveled all over the country showing and judging them, and it was a great experience. But then I developed some issues with bird lung or pigeon lung. I was able to redesign my loft and open up the windows and change things around. But most importantly, I quit using a litter. I had quit using shavings or straw or whatever I needed to condition the muffs on the west, because the west of England is a muffed breed. I use the slatted flooring out of Europe, which is great because it helps eliminate the dust. The droppings go through there and wasn't nearly as dusty, and it was a lot more healthy. I was unable to keep the West, and on a whim, I got a pair of old German owls at one of the NPA Nationals. I bought them from a now real good friend of mine, Greg Pola. That was the start. I just was real intrigued by them and found them very a delightful breed in the loft and fun to breed. Sort of went down the same path as I'd done before. I just got more and more competitive with them and really threw myself into the breed and have had them for about 16 years now.
I guess I didn't know that you were a master breeder in those other breeds as well. That's not easy to become a master breeder. It takes a lot of work and a lot of time, and you have to contribute something to that breed. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate. I had a lot of people that helped me along the way, and I learned a lot of things from other fanciers that had been very successful. And it's more than a hobby to me. It's a passion. I've enjoyed the journey the whole time.
What can you tell us about the origin of this breed? Was it a breed created from a cross or just continually working on certain features?
It's been around a long time over in Europe, specifically in Germany. The original German name for it, which I can't pronounce, actually was interpreted as the little gull, because they had a marking similar to a seagull. Over time, the name changed to Old German Owl. They came into this country, I'm going to say around 2000. A fellow in Michigan, John Nelson, imported quite a few, and they were a big hit. People gravitated to them quickly, and they became really popular. The club kind of took off, did really well, had a lot of people interested in them. And then this is just what I've learned since I've had them these last 16 years. The club went through some significant changes. There was some infighting, some problems that took place, and the breed really dropped in popularity. People just got out for whatever reason. That was before my time, so I can't really comment too much on that. But particularly in the last 15 years or so, they have really gained in popularity. The breed has changed where it's gotten a lot more attractive. The bird is more upright now, and it's just a real eye catcher at the shows. And we've got a very strong membership and active club now. It's really a great situation.
Well, I had no idea that it has only been in the States since like the 2000s. I really thought that it's been around for a long time. It's almost a common show breed right now. You see it at a lot of the shows, and the Old German Owl Club is a really strong and healthy club. I guess I assumed that was just going on a lot longer than 20 some years.
The first time I exhibited an old German owl in Louisville, and it would have been about 16 years ago. There were only two entered in the National Young Bird Show.
Wow.
And at one time, they would have a couple hundred. So that's how much it had declined. And now we are consistently one of the larger entries at Louisville every year, and certainly at the national and the major shows, whether it's Des Moines or Reading or the pageant. The Old German Owl generally has a real strong entry, 100, 150, 200 birds.
I definitely see them at the shows. They're there in force too, so that's really impressive. With that up and down, becoming really popular, then kind of falling away and getting really popular again. And you had mentioned that some of the features had changed on it. Have they changed the standard recently on the Old German Owl, or is that still going off of like an old German standard?
The standard was revised about 6 years ago, and because the original standard that had been interpreted from the German standard, it left a lot up to personal interpretation of the wording, and oftentimes when things are translated from another language, you lose a little bit, and so we got together a committee and went through it and altered the standard to make it more specific about the type of bird that should be bred and developed. And then 3 years ago, we voted in a new standard picture as well. The old standard picture was not. It just wasn't effective. It just didn't show the bird in its best light. And the new picture is much, much more attractive, and we've gotten a lot of positive comments about it, and just the shape of the bird has changed. Initially, when I first got them in, they tended to be long. They tended to stand with their tail almost horizontal. The crests were small and way back on the back of the head. The heads tend to be pinched. It just wasn't a very attractive bird, and over time, it has become shorter, cobbier, more upright, has a nicer expression in the face, a fuller head, a nice full crest. It's really a first-rate showbird now.
Can you talk a little bit about what the standard calls for and how they're judged on the point system?
The standard is one thing that I like so much about our standard, because it is a marked pigeon. You've got the wing shield that makes it so attractive. That's very difficult to get that shield the right color and the right number of feathers, et cetera, et cetera. And our standard makes a point of emphasizing that type and style take precedent over markings or color. And that, I think, has contributed to the type of bird that we have now. The markings are still important, don't get me wrong, but if there are two birds and a judge is looking at, and one of them is upright and just has a commanding presence, but maybe it only has 7 white flights on one wing and 9 on the other, and the other bird might be better marked. The standard ideal is 10 by 10, 10 white primary flights on each wing. Well, maybe it'll be 10 by 10, but if it's long and it's got a snipey head, or it's not quite as powerful or not as impressive as the other bird, then the better shaped bird is always going to win. And that's one thing that's really important about our standard. We put the same emphasis on the head and crest that we do on the body. We put a lot of emphasis on what we call general appearance. And that, again, is that type and style that catches a judge's eye. The current standard, which is available on the Old German Owl Club website, is, I feel like, a great document to follow. And the club also puts out a colored picture of the standard with the written standard around it. That's a great learning tool for newcomers, because they can look at the picture, they can read the standard and apply it. They can apply the words to the picture.
I have seen that before. That is really neat to have it right there while you're looking at the picture and you can read all the information right around it. That is a very good idea. Are there any kind of common faults that you're seeing with the old German Owl at the shows, like repetitive issues that are coming along with the breed that need to be worked on?
Not really. There's not anything that, I mean, for example, we had a lot of open back birds at one time where the flight feathers would stick up through the secondary feathers and look like sails. And we also had very low setting crest, but those have generally, for the most part, have improved a great deal. You're always going to find some birds that you kind of shake your head and you wonder why the person spent the entry fee on them to put them in, but they're generally newcomers and they've gotten these birds and they're trying to learn. And so it's imperative that a judge be kind and patient and point out things to newcomers. But I don't know of any specific fault that runs throughout the breed. There are things that I'd love to tweak on all of mine. I mean, I've had multiple national champions, and not one of them has been exactly what I want to breed. I'm always trying to breed a better one.
So, talking about show, can you talk about what show prep goes into getting the old German Owl ready for show?
Yeah, they're relatively easy to do that with. Now, they're primarily white with the shield markings. And then let me add this, we also have a tail mark version. You don't see many, they're pretty rare. And we also have two accepted self colors. This is sort of unusual. This came from the original German standard. White selfs are allowed and recessive red, but no others. And so no one's ever been able to explain that to me. And I have to wonder if it wasn't something that got lost in the original interpretation of the German standard, but it doesn't matter now. Those two self colors are available, and then the tail marks, which are rare. You just don't see many of them. Certainly the majority of birds shown are the shield mark. The bird body should be white, and we often have colored feathers down in the hock area. Many of those can be plucked prior to a show, and so they're not so obvious. The darker the bird, the more obvious they are. There's some trimming. The standard says that trimming is allowed, but it shouldn't be obvious. And that specifically relates to the crest. We don't want a real big, overpowering crest like you see in a nun or a helmet. We want a tighter, thicker crest. And there's been some videos posted on YouTube of how to actually trim that crest. Do it with some manicure scissors, and it's a tedious process that once you get the knack of it, it doesn't take long at all. You learn how to do it, and you can do it in a subtle way where it's not obvious. Those are the two biggest show prep things that I do is I do trim the crest, and I will look for any foul feathers where they're in the white section of the birds. Occasionally, you'll have a white feather in the shield that can be plucked, but that's pretty much it. Now, me, I go the extra mile. I try and I tip the beak 2 days before, just so it'll be a little bit smoother looking and not quite as pointed. I'll do that with some fingernail clippers, and oftentimes I'll clip the toenails a little bit, just the tip of them, so the claw's not catching in the fabric of the base of in the judging cages. We usually use a piece of carpet or indoor outdoor carpet, something like that, and so the birds can station properly. And I don't want their claws to get caught in it. But those are sort of incidental things.
And how's this breed's temperament? Are they pretty wily or are they a pretty docile breed?
They are pretty naturally tame. I have found that one thing that really attracted me to them was how easy they were to handle. Now, depending on most of my loft sections are relatively small, and so they're easy to catch. I handle them a lot as young birds. I talk to them, I kind of play with them, and they'll tame down very quickly. In fact, the cocks tend to get too tame, and they'll want to fight a little bit. It's a playful fighting, but they'll fight a little bit, particularly in the show cage. They're kind of showing off, and sometimes the hens are a little flirty. But that's my fault for handling them so much. But no, they have a very even temperament. They get along well with other breeds in a loft. I don't have any other breeds now, but I have in the past, and they'll stick up for themselves. It's funny. I've watched them pop a show racer or a show type racing homer, and they'll run them right out of the nest, just like, and they're half the size, so they can fend for themselves in that regard. But they have what I consider a delightful personality.
You are only doing old German owls right now?
Yes,
Okay.
that's my only breed.
Can you talk a little bit about the loft setup that you have your old German owls in, and kind of how you have it broken down?
I have a total of 6 sections. Like most pigeon guys, you never seem to have enough room. But my main loft, I have two 6x8 breeding lofts, and I do breed in individual pens. They're 32 inches square, and I have 4 on each side of those two 6x8 pens. I have bred owls in a community loft, and I've bred them in individuals, and they do fine in either one. I happen to have the individuals, and I'm retired, so time and the extra care to fool with them is not an issue for me. They breed equally well in either one. I have 2 holding pens that are 4x8 that I put extra birds in, extra cocks and hens, because I generally don't breed but from 8 pair. But I will hold over 4 or 5 cocks and hens that I feel like might be good enough to breed from. Maybe they're not quite as old, or maybe they're old breeders that I'm not really ready to get rid of yet, because I want to make sure the younger ones coming along will breed as good, if not better. And then I have 2 young bird pens. I think, let's see, one is 8x8, and the other one is only 4x6. They have large walk in fly pens, so they can accommodate quite a few young birds.
And because they do have a shorter beak, how are they in regards to raising their young? Do you foster or do they raise their own?
No, they'll raise their own babies. I will say, in my opinion, they are decent parents. They're not great. I wouldn't recommend them as feeders for a short faced breed. I know some people that have done it, but for the most part, they do a decent job. I have found that some, especially young cocks, want to drive the hens back down on eggs a little too quick. I'd like for the babies to be 10 days, 2 weeks old before they do that. And some cocks will start driving them a little too early. And so they don't parent quite as well. I do on occasionally do some supplemental hand feeding, which again, I'm retired and it's easy for me to do. Sometimes I think it's too easy, and maybe I do more of it than I should. But for the most part, they're good parents.
And for a fancy breed, you mentioned that the cocks will drive pretty good. So even when it comes to the breeding aspect of themselves, they're pretty prolific in that way. It doesn't take a lot of doing separations and encouragement and stuff like that to get them to breed.
No, they're pretty active and vigorous in that regard. I do trim the vents on the birds when I'm going to breed them, and I do that because I always go to the NPA National, and I don't mate up until the middle of February. I live in the southeast where it gets really hot. So by June, we are in 95-degree weather with real high humidity, and they're tired of breeding, and I'm tired of breeding them. So I have a relatively short breeding season. So I trim the vents to just make sure I get better chance at fertile eggs.
So based on your experience with these, someone who's coming into the showing world of it, would you suggest this breed as a novice pigeon fancier to start showing with?
Yes, they're not what I would call a kid's pigeon, like, say, performing rollers or racing homers or tipplers, birds that are just pretty much all you got to do is feed and water them, and they'll breed like rats. Old German owls are a show breed, and like all show breeds, are a little bit more hands-on. You have to do a little bit more. You do have to baby them a little bit more, but they're certainly nothing compared to a fantail or a Jacobin or English trumpeters, where they have a lot of trimming and a lot of manipulation to get them to breed properly. They'll do a good job, and yes, I think a novice can do well with them as long as they have the interest to pursue them.
And one thing I forgot to ask earlier, I've never heard of the tail mic. That's really interesting. I'm going to look some of those up, but you had mentioned, some of the colors that come in on the windshield. What are the colors that do come in the old German Owl breed?
All of the basic, we have all of the blue family of blue bar, blue checks. We even have blue barless that have done real well. The same thing in the ash reds, ash yellows, bars, checks. We have browns and khakis. We've got people now that are breeding Andalusians. We have grizzles in all of the base colors. Certainly blacks, reds, yellows that are solid shield colors. And they're like the black. You do see occasionally duns, the reds and the yellows. They're usually pretty strong entries. The bar colors, the blue bars and red bars, are probably the biggest classes at most of the shows. But we have rare colors too, as well. We've got people that are breeding Qualman and Dominant Opal and have done remarkably well in a relatively short period of time of introducing these new colors. And I know there's colors on the drawing board with people. They're working on Milky and Recessive Opal and things like that. So the future is really bright as far as the colors are concerned.
That's a lot more than I thought of. Yeah, I definitely see a lot of the reds at the shows and blacks. Those are pretty popular. If anybody's interested in finding out more about this, there is a national club. That's the Old German Owl Club. It's a really strong club. These guys are doing a lot at the shows. Their website is ogoc.org. They do have a Facebook too. Is that just under Old German Owl Facebook group?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Old German Owl Facebook group. So if you're interested in learning more about this breed and checking out that diagram that he mentioned, it is a really cool diagram. It shows a standard with all the information laid out around it. So as you're looking, you can just glance over, and absolutely, if you're getting into the breed, that's something that you definitely want to have handy. So Bill, I want to thank you so much for coming on and talking Old German Owls today. Really appreciate it.
Well, it was a pleasure, and I appreciate you having me. I always love to talk about pigeons and specifically Old German Owls. It's a great breed, and I've thoroughly enjoyed them.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the All About Pigeons podcast. Please help the pigeon hobby by telling your fellow club members or other pigeon friends about the podcast, and make sure to leave a good review or at least a 5-star for the podcast wherever you listen. If you have a topic or a person you want to hear more about on the podcast, or if you yourself would like to be a guest, just send an email to allaboutpigeonspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Hello and welcome to the All About Pigeons podcast. We have a very special episode for you today, so stick around. Today we have with us Drew Lobenstein. We're going to talk about Jacobins. Drew has had Jacobins since he was 16 years old and has been a master breeder of Jacobins for 40 years now. He has a master judge recognition from the National Pigeon Association. He's also a member of the NPA Hall of Fame and has received the NPA Lifetime Achievement Award. Drew has been published in at least 5 languages for his work in genetics and Jacobins, and traveled the world to judge and lecture on both subjects. Those travels include Australia, Canada, Mexico, France, Germany, Dubai, and India. He'll be traveling to judge the national show for the British Jacobin Society next January in Great Britain. And Drew, thank you for coming on and talking with us today.
My pleasure. Happy to be with you.
So you've had these pigeons since you were 16. How did you first come into this breed?
Well, I started when pigeons, my dad brought them home from the firehouse. The lady next door was moving. He brought some pigeons home when I was about 6. And from there, I had all kinds of pigeons up until the time I was in junior high school, I think maybe 12 years old, when I saw my first Jacobin, a pair of Jacobins, and they were at the loft of George Nuremberg, who lived in North Hollywood. George was quite a salesman. At that time, he was president of the Los Angeles Pigeon Club. But he signed me up, remember, but I saw those Jacobins and I fell in love with them. I asked him how much they were, and he said, well, those are $35 a pair. 12-year-old kid, I looked at that like it was $1 million. There's no way I was going to be able to afford that. And so by the time 3 or 4 years later, by the time I was 16, I was able to get a pair of red Jacobins from one of the local breeders by the name of Lud Brown. Lud Brown had Fantails and Jacobins as well. And then Harry Alexander, my good friend, lived about a block away. And the two of us, both kids, were early 15. He was 15, I was 16. And between us and Lud Brown and about 5 or 6 other local breeders who had been part of the Pacific Jacobin Club, we reconstituted the place, and the Pacific Jacobin Club became the center of attention for the whole Western United States. And then we hooked up with the Central Jacobin Club and the secretary, Bob Regal, who was also the secretary of the American Pigeon Club at the time. So 16 years of age, I started with Jacobins, and then the club all came to fruition. And Harry Alexander, my good friend, and I, we had each other to bounce stuff off of. He was quite the Jacobin fancier. In fact, he wrote the book. Harry wrote a book called The Jacobin Handbook for the New Fancier. If you try to get it, it's out of print these days, but I think there are about 200 copies made. And the book dealers at this point are selling them for between $150 and $200 a piece. I have in my stack because after Harry died in about 1988, Bill Griebel and Harry's mom and Lane Gardner and I and several others, including Tom McCaig, and I'm thinking John Hepner, combined efforts to produce the book. Harry had it almost finished. And by the time that was there, Bill Griebel and Lane Gardner got the artwork together and the text of the book, and I was helping to make sure that the details were correct. And there are a whole bunch of pictures in there. I'm in the book like 10 or 12 times, so kind of neat. I didn't plan on that, but that's the way Harry wrote it. But it's a great book. It talks about how to breed Jacobins, what the details are. It mentions names of a lot of different breeders at the time. And there's a historical perspective, too. He shows pictures of drawings of Jacobins from the Fulton books from the 1800s. He's even got Aldrovandi, who was the Italian that first recognized Jacobins back in the 1600s when they were called the rough pigeon, R-U-F-F, because of the feathers around their neck. But it's been an interesting lifetime to get here with all these. But I have started actually when I was 16. And from that point, I started learning and breeding and going to various places and visiting with breeders and picking their brains. And then I got hooked into the genetic guys. Harry Alexander at one point had produced almond Jacobins, and it was a genetic project that added a new color to Jacobin pigeons that hadn't existed before. The standard colors in Jacobins when I first got started were red and yellow and white and black, and the AOCs or splashes were the 5 group. And that's about all that was there. Occasionally you would see a blue or a mealy, but they were so far behind. They had been bred by selecting long-faced clean-leg tumblers from Great Britain, basically. And they had Jacobins that were maybe capuchin-like, but were not competing at the level that the reds, the yellows, the blacks, the whites, and the splashes. But at that point, Harry created the almonds, and he thought I should get busy. And so 1988 or so, by 1985 or so, I had introduced Andalusian or indigo into the Jacobins. Harry died about 8 years later in 1988, but I continued my work in, and I produced milky, brown. I'm working with barless Jacobins right now, and my most recent creation is the lemon or extreme dilute, which came from Jack Barkle in South Africa, and he discovered this mutation in a group of racing homers about 25 years ago. And I was able to get one of those mutated varieties and introduce it into Fantails and Jacobins and West of England Tumblers, and I'm working on throwbacks at the moment. So it's been quite an interesting piece of work getting the genetics down. That's been my niche, I guess, between judging and promoting Jacobins across the world. My genetic work is probably the thing I'm most noted for.
I never knew that they were called roughs, and I was going to ask you when you mentioned capuchins there. What can you talk about the history a little bit? Are capuchins a big part of that, or?
No, they're totally separate breeds.
Oh, really? Wow.
The Jacobin history, Aldrovandi, the 1600 version, recognizes them in his book, and it's in Italian, obviously. But the story goes, if you go to Wikipedia, Wikipedia will say that the Jacobins began in India sometime about the 1500s. But the story goes back even further than that, because Marco Polo went to India in the 1200s. In the late 1200s, Marco Polo was bringing back pigeons from India that were alive and well at that time included breeds like Lahores, Moldinas, Strassers, and things like that. But the Jacobins allegedly began in India and the Indian Fantail as well. The story that Marco Polo brought them into Europe, and because they ended up in Scotland, basically, several hundred years, the birds were developed in Scotland, and Scotland had the best Jacobins in the planet up until the early mid-1930s, when they were imported to the United States by several other breeders. There's some work done by Vern Bale, who had died just before I got involved with the Jacobins. But Vern Bale owned a motel in Illinois, in Peoria. He had probably the best Jacobins within the United States at that time. And he had a cohort by the name of Roy Bogue, who was in Canada, in a place, London, Ontario. Paul McNorgan and Roy Bogue, both there in London, Ontario, were the two Canadians. And they were both part of the Canadian Jacobin Club in the early 1900s, by 1930s and 1940s and 50s. They started the Central Jacobin Club. The Canadian Jacobin Club was at work. But Louis Christner in Bay City, Michigan, was part of the organization of that Central Jacobin Club, which met in the central United States. And they used to be the biggest supporter, and they would hold the biggest shows in the country. I visited Mr. Bogue in 1963. My parents took a ride across the United States. And when I visited with Roy Bogue, who lived in London, Ontario, there had been a fire at his house probably 2 years before. There was a barn, and there was huge pigeon lofts, and there was like a dog kennel. The barn was about half burned down, and the pigeon coop that was there had about fly pens. And then the dog kennel had, the individual kennels with like one pair of Jacobins per cage. I thought that was pretty interesting. And both had probably 100 pair of Jacobins. I was like 16 or 17 years old, and my eyes were bigger than my stomach. My grandmother used to say, I was just looking at Jacobins. I was like, this was phenomenal, outstanding. What a big deal. And we were looking at the pigeons, and eventually I was able to convince Mr. Bogue that it was time to sell me a couple. And then we had the issue of getting them across the border and to Los Angeles. I got a bird for Harry, and I got a bird for me. That all started from there. And from Bogue's house, we had 100 pair, I think, and he was bragging about the fact toward the end of the year they had raised 100 babies out of 100 pair. So that averaged about one baby per pair. To McNorgan had these individual coops. They were Jacobin pens that he had built and designed. McNorgan had 17 pair of Jacobins breeding, and at the same time, McNorgan had 100 baby Jacobins as well out of 17 pair. Both had 100 babies out of 100 pair.
Wow.
And I thought, I wonder which one of these guys is the better breeder. Both had the better show record, and I think McNorgan was the better breeder between the two of them. And I can tell you honestly, McNorgan was the better teacher.
Yeah.
Paul McNorgan ended up being my mentor. I don't know, I must have visited with Paul 50 or 60 times over the year before he passed. And I learned so much from him about the structure of Jacobins. We would go through it, we'd pick them out, we'd look at the birds, we'd look at the parents, and we'd compare, well, where did this come from? How does this work? And there were tons of theories. And McNorgan would just talk, and he would share. And at some point in the process, there was Doc Lawson up in Northern California, Napa, Harry and me, and Paul, and we'd get a tape recorder, and Paul would start it, and he would be sitting in the pigeon pen, and you could hear the birds flapping their wings behind him, and cooing and that sort of thing. And Paul would sit there and he'd think about it, and he would bring up some subject, and he would talk about it and put it on tape. And then he would take the tape and he would send it to Harry. And Harry would have it for a while, listen to it, then add on the tape something that he had to say. And then he would send it to Doc Lawson, and Doc Lawson would hear it and add on and send it to me. And I would listen and pass it on, and I pass it on to Paul. After Paul McNorgan died, I have about 5 or 6 of those tapes. And on the tape is Bill Lawson, Harry Alexander, me, and my mentor, Paul McNorgan. And we're talking about all kinds of different things related to Jack. And that's my instruction that I came. But Paul McNorgan and Louis Christner later, really important to my Jacobin life. And master breeders that are alive today, John Mankia, Ron Davis in Oklahoma City, and Jim Ecker, and then Clint Robertson, of course, in Manitoba, and Bill Satcher also in Manitoba. But we're all friends. We've got maybe 40, 50 years now of friendship with these guys that share the same passion. But they're all good people. We talk to each other maybe weekly or at least monthly. And we just keep in touch. We see how each other doing and what the issues are. And when we get together, the conversations get really good. All kinds of great details happen when we get together. It's kind of fun.
So you were saying that the one guy had 100 pair and he got
Yes.
100 birds, and the other guy only had 17, got the same number. Do you think that had something to do? Like, do these require some kind of special loft setup or perches or nest bowls, or what's the best way to accommodate these birds with a loft?
My observation, I think at 17 years old, was husbandry. The
Mm,
care and feeding of the birds was totally different. I watched Roy Bull take I don't know, it was like a watering can for water.
mhm,
And I watched him go pour the water into dishes that were out in the fly pens. And there was grain growing around the water dishes.
oh
It was
wow.
like, plants of grain. There was grain all over the place. It wasn't dry.
Mhm,
That was wet, grain right around the water containers. I don't know that the water containers were ever cleaned. We just come by and he'd add more water to it. The feeding was like, I think birds got overfed. There were mice present at times. I could smell the mice.
oh yeah.
But Bo, listen, he was talking to me at that moment, and I just, boy, you have a great record. He says, oh yeah, out of 15 years, he said, 15 years, I won a championship 13 times. This was at the Central Jacobin Club meets. And
Mhm.
I said, whoa. I said, what happened to the other two? He says, those were the two times I judged. And I went, oh, wow. So out of some, these times that Borg had all these wonderful 15 years, and 13 of them he won grand champion, and the two other ones he didn't win, he was judging. But McNorgan had individual pens. It was a pen that had like 2 by 2 by 2. So it's a cube. And then it had a door going out, and there was a wire run on the outside of it, the same size as the one on the inside. 1 by 1 wire so that the stuff would fall through it. But
Mhm.
he would water the birds and feed the birds in clean cups, and they got new water every day, and the cups were cleaned every day.
Yeah.
And the feed went in the other cups, and there was grit and food and water in front of the birds, and that water got changed every day.
Yeah.
And sometimes there'd be vitamins in it. Occasionally, Bogue would use cod liver oil or something like that before the show season, and we'd give cod liver oil pills to the birds, and they
Mhm.
would get this kind of extra shine or bloom to them.
Mhm.
But the basic feed included corn, Canadian peas, kaffir, or what you call sorghum, and if you listen to the guys that are selling stocks and bonds, and wheat. So the four basic grains then were the feed that those birds ate all those years ago, and it was just four basic feed, four basic grains the whole time. And more corn during the winter because it helped them keep warm.
Are there any kind of specific health issues that would arise with this breed?
No different things that would normally appear with any other breed. Jacobin's attitude, whatever, they've been bred for this huge feather formation.
Hmm.
In the genetics, I found how they're structured, but there's three basic parts to the hood on a Jacobin. One is the interior crest, like you would have on a helmet. The second piece of work is what they call the shell, which if you look at a Bocar trumpeter, that's laid back and is down into the neck. And then the third piece is what they call pinwheels, which is on the side of the neck. If you look at a Chinese owl or a Jacobin, you see the spinning whirl, the pinwheel effect. So the pinwheel, the internal crest and the shell crest are big and selectively bred for it. You get all those parts big and together is the basic formation that makes a Jacobin hood formation. In the process of that, you can have genetics, but they're aggressive. They didn't have small cool thing. They have, if you raise powders, for instance, if you raise Norris croppers or Warburg shield croppers or pygmy powders or Bruners, those birds are interactive birds. They're real sweet and really tame and real calm, and they basically interact with you. They'll be super tame. They might land on your shoulder, but those breeders talk to their pigeons, and in the shows, you'll hear the judges go, ooh, wah, ooh, wah, ooh, and the birds will dance in front of them.
Right.
Jacobins don't do that. Jacobins are more stallion-like. They put in there, they're bold and they're ready to go. There's like an edge to them that is required for them to, be good specimens. But their attitude is a little bit more aggressive. In fact, Louis Christa one time referred to them as pugnacious. He said, those guys are boxers and fighters. They'll tear you apart. And sometimes the aggressive birds will, what they call scout each other. And the
Yeah.
parents will scout babies that come in off of somewhere, they get in the wrong spot, and you'll see the baby with a whole bloody head on it because the parents attacked it and just pecked on it, pecked on it, and pecked on it until they almost destroyed the life of the bird.
What about raising their own? Are they pretty good parents as far as no fosters needed?
Yeah, well, McNorgan, back to McNorgan, his birds all went with him with no foster parents at all. His birds, one of the things he selected for was they bred the birds. Bogue, I think, was a little bit, the reason he kept more pigeons is because they didn't breed as well. but he didn't use foster parents that I saw either. A number of people do use foster parents. Sergio De Almeida, one of the top master breeders, he and his dad were a great team of master breeders, exactly. They live in New Jersey. He used what he called pumpers, and he would have racing homers, and the birds would have a chance to have the pumpers would raise the babies, and then the Jacobins would raise what they could, but he would raise many birds because he would steal the eggs and give them to the foster parents. Numbers of other people use foster parents and that, but John Mankia I spoke to today in Virginia. I think you spoke to him as well about this podcast. We've been talking to him. He said, "We're surprised why the birds are raising their own babies this year." And all he did was trim the vent feathers, the hawk feathers on the bird, and a little bit off the flights and tail. And some of the guys like Krista used to cut all the fronts off of them too with the whole chain part. So it opened them up. They looked like tumblers. They just skin them down so that they could breed easy enough. There is that issue with the, fluffy feathers, and I generally trim the feathers off of the hawk feathers and below the vent, and then I'll trim 2 or 3 inches off of the tail and the flight feathers so that they don't knock things around as much. And I have better success with that. I don't cut the fronts off of them because I like to look at the Jacobins as if they're actually still a Jacobin.
Right.
But some of the better breeders that live in the areas where it snows, they'll put the birds out, and those birds go through a molt, and they'll drop all those cut feathers, and they'll bring in the feathers that are not cut. And pigeons, Jacobins particularly, go through a really good molt about every other year. So if they have in their baby feather, they look really good. Generally, as yearlings, they don't. But as a second year, then they look really good again. Or if the baby fur is not as good, their yearling feathers might be just super. And then the following year, they don't look as good. And then the third year, they look back to the bloom again. So the interesting thing after having them had them for so long, there are a whole bunch of things that are specific to the birds that you have. Raising them, caring for them, they can raise their own babies. But I would say if you're a kid and you're starting out, start off with birds that breed so you can get the husbandry right.
Yeah.
So that you can watch them and see the babies hatch. The eggs are laid, they're fertile, they hatch, they grow into babies, and the babies grow into mature, and then they go through the molt, and they go through the teenage stage, they start putting body weight on, and then you can interact with them. Once you get that process down and you see how it works, then try other stuff. Get something decent. The English trumpeters right now are really popular. I think you spoke to Bob Nolan recently. Those guys are just phenomenal, and they breed really well. They're very dependable breeding stock. Fantails are good breeders. Jacobins, yes and no. It depends on the individual birds that you get. But if you select for their breeding stock, like Paul McNorgan did, you'll breed birds that breed. Think of Charles Darwin. They produce what they are. And if they're good breeders, they'll produce more good breeders. If they're terrible breeders, they won't produce birds that do very well. So what a surprise. But that's how this whole thing works.
That's such a common thread too, the little hidden secret to all the successes. It's just general, like you said, animal husbandry, clean water, dry environment.
There's a guy in Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh area, by the name of Bob McKee. Bob McKee writes in genetic words. He's such an intelligent guy, and he speaks on a plainer level. It's a bit above most people. They don't understand what he has to say a lot. But I'm on the language. I speak to him really well. We had a great admiration for each other. But he probably gave out more information about how to keep and care for pigeons, and disinfecting them and keeping them, and all the different things you have to do to keep your birds healthy. And he's one of the best I ever met. And he really is good at that husbandry part of the pigeon raising business. And those are good things to know. But the Jacobins, you keep, the fewer you keep in the pen, the better off you are, because they tend to battle with each other. They'll fight. The cocklers in the pen, they'll pick each other, and they'll fight until they look raggedy. And so, when they go into the molt and you first have a molt, a lot of the showbirds will be in individual cages so that they don't have access to pick and fight with each other. So they might be in the breeding cages, and the cockbirds will be okay. Hens might be in open pens because they generally they're not as aggressive, and they won't beat up on each other. But the cockbirds will watch out. The ones in the cold, like in Southern California, we don't have, here it snowed twice in the last 50 years. So it was a total accident. It'll get cold sometimes at night, but if you go into the Midwest or up in the northern part of the United States, or definitely into Canada, where it snows and you have a full winter where it's super cold for periods of time, the birds end up keeping warm instead of fighting. So here in Southern California, those of us that's warm all the time, we don't really have a winter. Those birds tend to pick and fight on each other, even though the days go shorter. And that's just part of the idea about what the location is and what the conditions of the weather are where you're breeding and the location where you live.
So you've traveled all over the world with this. Does it seem like the Jacobin breed is more popular in one country specifically, or is it kind of the same all everywhere you go?
It's significant. Years ago, it didn't used to be as good outside the United States. Just Scotland and Great Britain had pretty good birds, and those came to North America in the 1930s. By the 1940s, it was still breeding. 1950s, the birds were improving a little bit. But from the late 1960, 1970, Louis Christner, Roy Bogue, Paul McNorgan, a fellow by the name of Ed Bachman in Michigan, and later Jim Ecker, contributed probably the best quality pigeons in the world at that time. Most of them came out of Roy Bogue's place. If they were red or yellow, any decent quality red or yellow in the world had come from Roy Bogue's breeding of some kind. He got birds back and forth with Vern Bale, and they would trade a kite once in a while. Bogue would raise them in his reds. There's a kite. He'd raise a red kite, and he'd send it to Vern Bale, who would use it in his blacks. And Bale would raise a kite out of his blacks and send it back to Bogue, and Bogue would use it in his reds. So that kite business back and forth across. But Christner got birds from Bogue, and he got birds from McNorgan. Bachman got birds from Bogue and birds from McNorgan. So in the history of the Jacobins, at least in North America, and then I'll talk about how they expanded over the rest of the world. But if you have a family of reds and yellows, they likely can be traced back to Roy Bogue. If you have a family that's of black or white, those can all be traced back to Paul McNorgan or Louis Christner or Bachman. But Christner and Bachman got their birds from McNorgan and Bogue. So of those four people in the Michigan, Canada area, London, they produced the greatest Jacobins in the world at that time. Later on, some of those birds got spread around. Mr. Bogue died in about 1975. Paul McNorgan lasted to early 1980s, mid 1980s. And his birds, I was there with Paul right before he moved out of his home to a hospice place, and basically responsible for distributing his Jacobins across the world. It was a sad yet a joyous time for both of us. But those birds went out. Bachman, Christner, they're both gone as well now. But the Jacobins in the country were phenomenal in the U.S. Late 1980 or mid 1990s, a fellow by the name of Abraham Shaji was basically a resident of Bahrain, a little island company in the Persian Gulf. He came to the United States, and he went from loft to loft with a video camera. And so he went to McNorgan, he went to Christner, he went to Ecker, he went to John Kirchner in Pennsylvania, he went to Sergio's place, he came to see me, he went to Ron Davis in Texas, and he posted these interviews with us. He looked at our lofts, looked at our birds, and got it all down on videotape, and then produced this tape of Jacobins of all the major master breeders in the country at the same time. So this tape was just phenomenal. I have a copy of it somewhere. It's like now 30 years old or so, but that was a seminal part. That tape also went across to the Middle East. The guys in Saudi Arabia saw it, in Kuwait they saw it, and they started going, we got to have some of these birds. And so they started the Middle East, and man, they bombarded us. Every bird in the place got sold. Some of them went to Saudi Arabia, some of them to Kuwait, some of them to Bahrain, and they were busy shipping those birds all over the world. Australia got in the mix of it. I had birds go to Australia too. Brian Frost got birds from me maybe 30 years ago or so. And Brian Frost, master breeder Jacobins, he won champion in Australia about, 13 or 15 years in a row, like Bogue. But those birds all came back to, related to stuff that he had gotten from me, picked them out himself when he came to the house. It was kind of a neat time. A lot of guys ended up selling their really good birds. They don't have the great birds to breed from, but they got all this cash for, selling these birds overseas. I didn't do it that way. I sold every bird that I could spare, but I kept all the best ones that I knew were going to breed from me.
There you go.
But it was a great, I would say, calling opportunity, but there was absolutely no way that I didn't keep but the best 4 or 5 pair in any particular color, because all the rest of them were sold. And my life just got incredibly better for about 5 or 6 years. And it was just a wonderful experience. Abraham Shadi, though, was also a dealer of pigeons, not only Jacobins, but he was purchasing and buying and gathering up Modinas and corner tumblers, English trumpeters, English carriers, all kinds of different breeds of pigeons, and they all went over to the Middle East. And then in the last 10 years or so, those birds have gone from the Middle East into India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. And when Bob Nolan and I went to India several years ago, 2019, I think it's about 4 or 5 years ago now, some of the best birds in the world were there at the show we got to judge. Jacobins are outstanding quality. The Lahores, best I've ever seen. Indian Fantails, best I've ever seen. There were powders and croppers and homers and different varieties of birds. Zitterals, I see. They're not a common breed, but the best ones I've ever laid eyes on were there in India. How in the world does this happen? But the great Jacobins, Jim Ecker and I had this conversation maybe a month or so ago. But the pigeons that are now expendable, the sale birds, are better quality than our champions were, 20 years ago and 30 years ago. Yeah. Grand champion here would be a sale bird if you were still doing it. And you're like, whoa, has the quality improved? Clint Robertson, I think, and Sergio De Almeida get credit for that here in North America. And all the birds that went from them overseas, and Ecker too, Jim Ecker, he's got some great pigeons. And Ron Davis as well.
Is there any national or international clubs for the Jacobin breed here in the States?
There's no international club, but in the Europeans, the French and the Germans, and the Brits and the Belgians, and Scots and the Irish, we all use the same standard.
Oh, really? Okay.
John Mankia and I went to France, 5 years ago or so. We're looking at pigeons, and everybody recognizes the same great birds. So the judges there are looking for virtually the same things we are here. So you put a good one up and you rank them. It was easy to see the great Jacobins out of there, no matter where they came from. Australia, great pigeons there. Great Britain, guys in Ireland, a fellow by the name of Jim McGarrigle. Wonderful pigeons. And there's 2 or 3 other guys there that compete with him. They're just phenomenal breeders of pigeons. There's a fellow in Great Britain, which I'll go see in January, Finley By. And he got a hold of some brown Jacobins that, I'm thinking from some of the stuff that I had created. Nick Smith is there. Numbers of others are really outstanding judges and evaluators of pigeons. But great Jacobin quality. A fellow by the name of Ahmed Aliani is in Saudi Arabia. He's one of the best of us all. Just fabulous. And there's a fellow in Bahrain that is just wonderful on that list. About 4 or 5 of them in Bahrain that are all great master breeders of pigeons. But there's one by the name of Tariq Aziz that is particularly well known. He's got a magic touch with his Jacobins. And my friend I've judged with guys in India. Numbers of people, they're promoters of pigeons, and we share and we talk. I get emails from guys in Pakistan particularly, or Bangladesh or India. And I'm just on the telephone or Zoom meetings or something with the guys all the time, talking about pigeons and how to prepare them for the show and what to feed them and what are the details of what to get sick or what kinds of things can go wrong, and then how to treat those things so that you don't lose the birds.
Well, can you give us a little breakdown on what you would do for preparing a Jacobin for a show?
Sure. Yeah, Jacobins, when they get ready, but they have to be completely molted. That's the first part. First of all, you have a quality pigeon. That's to start. And there's all kinds of varieties. You have smaller birds that have thicker, fuller feather, and you have bigger birds that maybe have more to do. But the bigger the birds are, the tougher they are to get ready for the show. Because the bigger birds have to be really perfect, and that's not easy. But you get the birds together, you want to make sure they have proper feed and clean food and clean water. And sometimes you give them electrolytes and that sort of thing. But they need to be in a space where they can't fight. So when they go through the molt, make sure they don't have any bugs on them. You debug them and deworm them if you're in one of those places that you have issues with parasites. But get rid of the bugs, get rid of the additional threatening stuff. And you want to make sure that they're on thick wood shavings, pine shavings better. Cedar shavings people use sometimes, but the odor or the pine stuff that comes from it, the cedars, is not healthy for the animal. So you want to use pine rather than cedar. Other people might use clay or kitty litter or corn cobs or that sort of thing. It just needs to be so when there's manure in the pen, that it has a place to dry so that it doesn't get on their feathers while they're molting, so they're super clean. And then in that process, you want to maybe get a spray bottle of water. If you could put bath pans out for them, if they'll bathe, that's terrific. Otherwise, I use just a spray bottle with like a mister, and I'll pick the bird up in my left hand, and I'll face it to myself, but I'll spray a cloud of water, cold water particularly, on the bird And as they're molting, it really helps the feathers open up, and the chaff that's on the outside of the feathers, will go away, and they molt. The dander from pigeons, but just the water, just clean, cold water, and you just like shake the drops off of them and put them back in the pen. And as long as they're on dry shavings, the droppings and the water will get soaked up in the shavings. The birds will stay clean. Eventually, you want to take them out and put them in a judging pen so that the judging pen is familiar to them. It's a comfortable space for them. You don't want birds that have never been there and they're looking around wondering where they are. They head for the corners or they sprout down. They call those crouchers. If you go to the ground, you want the bird to stand up and show, and that has to be bred into them or conditioned into them.
Yeah.
So the good birds are finished with their molt. They have all the parts there. You can set them in the cage. They're clean, freshly molted, and they will stand there and perform for the judge. That's kind of where it goes. But make sure they're trained and they have spent time in the judging pens so that they're familiar with that. It's not a place, they're not looking around wondering where they are. It's a place that they have actual familiarity with, and they'll perform. And it's really a neat things to watch. But most of those things can be bred into your pigeons. They can either be bred in or bred out. And that all happens in genetics.
The book that your friend Harry wrote, are there any other books on Jacobins that you would recommend to a Jacobin breeder?
Yes, yeah, there's a German book, and I'm just forgetting the name, but Perukatauben is what it comes out in German, but Perukatauben is Jacobin, German. There's a book in French, they call them, in French, they call them capuchins. This is kind of interesting political role. Back in the 1800s, there were monks in France called Jacobin monks, and what they have these, like, they wear a hoodie, like a sweatshirt with a hood, and they were part of the political activists. They were super active in politics in France. And so the Jacobin monks that were busy, making all kinds of noise, they were either liked or disliked, but they were a strong political force. And so these pigeons that looked like with the head formations closed up in these feathers, they referred to them as Jacobins. And it's funny to see, but in France, instead of calling them Jacobins, they're interested in the political arena, they refer to the Jacobins as Capuchin. And so it's like the Capuchin Club is basically a Jacobin club, but the French are the only ones that don't call them Jacobins, and that's where the name came from.
Oh, that's
pretty cool.
Yeah.
So the rest of us call them Jacobins. We don't call them Capuchin, because Capuchin refers to an entirely different breed of pigeon.
Right.
But I thought that was kind of funny that we got in that mode.
Well, we're coming up against the clock here. Thanks for coming on and talking with us on Jacobins. I know we discussed having you come back on, and we're going to do an episode with color genetics. So
that's perfect. I read Jacobins, and you talk about Jacobins and judging. Because of my speech background, I end up talking a lot of, it's more a performance when you're judging. But the judges of pigeons are also teachers. And so when you're looking at pigeons, if you're talking about what you see, the audience will be paying attention, and you can show them the very characteristics of the individual pigeons you're looking at. And they can see good stuff and bad stuff as you pointed out. But the judge is an important interpreter for those new breeders, especially. Teaching. It's a great thing. It's really neat. So I appreciate being the subject today, and I enjoy talking to you.
Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you for listening to another episode of the All About Pigeons podcast. Please help the pigeon hobby by telling your fellow club members or other pigeon friends about the podcast, and make sure to take some time and leave a good review for the podcast wherever you do listen. If you have a topic or a person you want to hear more about on the podcast, just send an email over to allaboutpigeonspodcast@gmail.com, and thank you so much for listening. Hello, and welcome to the All About Pigeons podcast. We have a very special episode for you today, so stick around. Today we have with us Andre Tavares. We're going to talk about the short-faced tumblers in general, and specifically, we're going to touch on the English short-faced tumbler. Andre has been involved with pigeons since he was 10 years old. He was one of the first to ever fly 500 rollers at once, and is known for his own line of almond rollers. He has won the reserve champion for short-faced plainhead at the AHA in 2023, got first place at the Reading Pigeon Association in January of 2023, and recently he has got the first place champion for the English short-faced tumbler in 2024 at the National Pigeon Association National Show. So, Andre, thanks for coming on and talking with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, you've been involved with pigeons since you were 10. What was your pathway into getting into the short-faced tumblers?
Well, okay, when I was a kid, I used to go down to the pet shop out here in New York, in Brooklyn, and there would be lots of pigeons in there. And what attracted me to the short-faced birds were the beaks on the sides of the birds. That all the big birds had these long beaks, and the small birds with the little beaks, those really stood out, and I just really loved them from that time.
So the term short-faced tumblers really covers a wide span, and you've dealt a lot with the English short-faced tumblers, but can you get into the history of the short-faced tumblers and what all that includes when someone says that?
The very first short-faced tumbler ever bred in history is called the Ancient, and it's appropriately named because it's the oldest of all short-faced breeds. It's the book Wendell Levi describes the Ancient as the ancestor of all short-faced breeds, which means that this bird been around for years and years. I'm not sure if it's 17 something BC or 1700 BC. It's a long time ago that this bird was developed in ancient Persia, Middle Eastern area. As the English folks went into this place and found this beautiful bird, it was brought back to England. The breed has been defined as a show breed from England, and many breeds came out of that one because that was the original short-faced bird.
And are these strictly showbirds now, or does anybody fly these, or for tumbling or anything like that?
No. These are all strictly showbirds now. The flying ability has been wiped out from it because such a rare bird, and you don't want to lose this bird just for any reason of flying. They're not easily replaceable because of the breeding reasons.
And with it being an older breed, can you pretty much get all the different colors that you would want?
It's up to what the standard says that the colors are involved. Me being an exhibitor, a breeder and an exhibitor, I only breed to the standard. And then if the standard does require you to be straightforward and stick to the standard, which means they don't want any colors that are not in the standard. Otherwise, those colors will be called mismark and they will be disqualified from the show. So you have to stick to the standard.
So with this being a short-faced and a non-flying bird, what kind of setups do you have to have in their loft? Is it, how would it be different than other lofts?
Well, one thing, the shelf size is smaller because you do not need a lot of space to house these birds since they're not tall. And I'm just going to give you a generalization on short faces, not a particular type of short face, because it's the same rule of thumb is for all of them. You don't need a lot of space to house them, but they do require exercise, plenty as much, and just like any bird. The bigger the environment, the better for the bird for exercise purposes. But if you just want to house them, you don't need that much space. They can take a shelf that would be like 10 inches tall by a foot wide and then a foot deep like that. As opposed to you have like some homers, you need to get some really big shelves. So these birds don't require a lot of space when it comes for breeding, because when the breeding season comes, they don't need to sit on their own eggs. You just substitute the eggs to the foster parents. So you just need them to lay and get ready for the next round of laying.
Okay. And that kind of was going to the next question right there is, with the short face like that, you do have to foster these babies?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. You have to. It depends on the breed, though. Like I said, we were talking about short-faced breeds. The general thing to do is to foster parent them. You want your reproduction to be really fast, then you don't let them sit on their own eggs. You swap them right away. I will get a little technical with that. If you're an experienced breeder like I am, like I've been doing this for years and years and years, and I don't want that many babies. So I will let the parents go through the cycle of breeding, which means laying eggs and hatching their own and milking them for a few days. And then the babies get swapped over to the foster parents. But that's not for everybody.
What breed do you use for fostering?
Rollers.
Rollers. Any particular reason, just they got the good size and good parents?
No, the reason why I use rollers is because those are the birds I had before I started getting involved with short faces in this place where I'm at now.
Are there any other issues that come up when you're breeding this type of bird right here? I mean, do they have fertility issues or anything like that?
No, I think the fertility's been pretty good, but the problem is, especially for novice breeders, is getting the hatchlings to survive day one. That is your biggest obstacle in the game there. experienced breeders know what to do when hatchlings are hatched. And it doesn't matter if they're under the foster parents or under the original parents. The hatchling is susceptible to die fast because they don't pick their heads up like a normal baby would, per se. A normal baby will hatch out of the nest, hatch out of the egg. As soon as the baby dries up, the egg yolk, well, that area that is still nourishing the baby, after it hatches, it dries out. Now the baby gets hungry, and now he wants to eat. Some of them are too busy sleeping it away that they do not pick up their heads and ask for food. They don't beg for food at that stage. So what the experienced breeder will do is, that's why I say timing is everything. The breeder will go and lift up the foster parent, take the baby out of the nest, and milk him himself with a syringe, like a really, really micro syringe that, actually it's called a pipette. And you have to get a substitute milk for it, which is called pigeon crop milk. And you have to mix the formula in very warm water and keep it warm as you feed it to the babies. And less is more. You cannot overfeed these 1-day-olds because otherwise they will choke and die, or they can't breathe, and you'll drown them if you give them too much food. The thing that I have around here is less is more, because when you give them a little bit of food, the crop milk, they're gonna take it in really, really well, and you can see that their little crops are a little pouched up into, it looks like a little white ball right underneath their beaks, like right under where the crop area is. And now you put the baby back to the foster parents, and the foster parent is gonna sit on them and continue to keep them warm. Now, when this baby has absorbed all this baby food, that is this baby crop milk, pigeon crop milk that has been fed, it's going to get this serious awakening. Like, it's going to be energetic. It's going to beg for food. It has this energy, and it wants to get fed. So now it will pick up its head and it will rub its mother's or father's belly, asking for food, and the foster parents will gladly milk a baby that's asking.
How long are you doing the feeding then? Just for a day or so?
Sometimes sometimes all it takes is one time, because with what the objective is to get the baby to ask for food. That's the objective. You want him to grow, to get energy, so that he can lift himself up and beg for food. Like tiplets and homers and flights, all those things, when they hatch, they already pick their heads up and start begging for food as soon as they're hungry. Short faces don't do that.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, that's definitely some really good advice right there.
Yeah.
Are there any kind of specific health issues that are associated with this breed?
I would say that, great husbandry is the right idea. They're susceptible to like eye infections a lot. And that is because when they're drinking, they usually put their whole face in the water, so the beaks are so small.
Yeah.
They can't use their beak as straws like a normal, like a homer with domestic short flight, roller, those kind of birds. So the short face will dip its whole face into the water container. Sometimes the eyes can get a little bit of an eye infection from this reason. The best way to handle these birds is to feed them in a cup source that is not so deep, so that way they don't have to stick their whole heads in there.
Oh, smart. There you go. That's a good solution. So let's talk about getting these birds ready for a show. And you were talking about the standard and things like that to begin with. So what's your routine before a show, and how far out are you pulling these birds and everything else?
Okay, it all starts with, for me, I start prepping my birds for the show season during the molting season, which is, for me, is the beginning of August, and then through September and October. Those months are the preparation for the show season. The most important thing that I gotta keep my birds is or keep parasites off of my birds. Like feather louse, lice, maybe mites, or any kind of. Let me just say something. There used to be a fly that used to be attached to pigeons that I have not seen in like 25 years, and I'm glad I didn't see that fly. It used to just roll all over. Used to go all around the pigeon, and I don't see that no more. I'm not sure if it's extinct or not, but I haven't seen it. So what we do now is clean up your birds by giving them baths, and it's better. The treatment works better when they take a bath themselves, as opposed to, you could spray the coop, you could spray the birds, but nothing works better than them taking a bath with the parasite treatments in the water. And that's the first thing that I do during the molting season. That way, anything that's attached to the pigeon would come off on their feathers and come right back on the bird once the feathers get off the once the feathers are on the ground. Those lice and mice will come back to the pigeon. So now what I want to do is keep them parasite free by I give them ivermectin. I trick that parasite. I give them just in case they develop some type of immune system towards it. So I use ivermectin, is a cowporon solution, and I also use borax. I use sawtooth soap baths, and I also use bleach in my baths. So I give my birds all these different baths. So then by the time the show season comes, when you look, because there's shows that when you're showing the pigeon, they actually have a floodlight or fluorescent light right there. So the judge would pick up the bird by the wings and by he holds them in his hand, and then with one hand he'll stretch out his wings and put them on the light to see if there's any pinholes or any mice or lice, anything that's not supposed to be on the bird. That's one of the most important things I do. And then the second thing I do that's very important is beak filing. Some people use nail clippers and all that. The professional guys, I like to call them that, we use files, and we can use like a nail clipper a little bit. The reason why we use files is because when you clip, and let's say you hit the vein at the end of the beak, the bird's going to bleed right away. Now, if you're filing, as you file, you will see if there's anything that you need to stay away from, because you're taking your time as you file. When you clip, there's no going back on that. Once you cut the vein at the end of the beak, the bird is going to start bleeding. And if it's a white bird, like I have short face helmets, birds are completely white except for the tail and the head. And if you clip that little blood vein on the end of the beak, that white belly on that bird is going to get full of blood. And now he's not a show bird no more. Now he's so dirty that not even bleach will get that out. So you got to be very careful with that.
So when you're doing the filing, are you kind of just looking at the standard and like the shape that you're working with there and trying to achieve that?
Yes. Okay, I'll give you an example. I have English short-face tumblers. The standard for those birds require that the beak be as much as a finch-like as possible.
Oh, wow.
So you have to file the beak in the shape of a V. There's different beaks for different short faces. Like for the ancient breed, it's more of a little of a bot's beak. It's almost like a little square beak, like you take a cubic or a box, and you put the edge part towards the front of the, like you just see the front, the two angles, the two sides, and the very end just meets right there. That's the beak of an ancient. If you show a English short-faced tumbler, you want to see a V formation looking at you, that the point is sticking out. That is a finch beak. So all these short-faced breeds have their own beak setting and their own beak that the standard is asking for.
So what about the ice ear? Do you do any kind of like vet RX on the ice ear or on the feet or anything like that?
No, depending. See, that's another thing too. Like I'm talking a lot about the standard because that's our holy grail when it comes to breeding. The standard on some breeds requires that the sear be as natural as possible without any. They cannot have like a suntan, and the sear is red because now that's not part of the standard. You have to pay very close attention to the standard before you get involved with breeding. You have to read and study the standard deeply and thoroughly. That way you stay in the standard. Once you get out of the standard, now the bird is not a show bird anymore. Now he's a bird you brought to the show, and that's not going to win because the judge knows the standard and knows that bird is not supposed to look like that.
You were just at the National Young Bird Show, right?
Yes.
How far of a drive is that for you, and how do you transport your birds to a show if it's a long drive?
It's a 12-hour ride, but for me, it's usually longer because I leave early and stuff, and I'm not like rushing there. One of the things that I do so that my birds can get there comfortable, because pigeons get dirty after they're touching each other and fighting inside a cramped up cage or a cramped up pigeon carrier. So what I do is I use cedar chips on the floor, and I try not to stuff too many into a carrier. That way if there's a little fighting going on, whoever doesn't want to fight can always run away. Try to keep them clean as much as possible. And another thing too that I use, I also have pigeon carriers that have these divided sections in there that they're not in contact with any other pigeon in the case because there's a dividers in between. That's also a good source and a good way to carry them.
Yeah, those are nice carriers where you can put them in their own individual compartments. Yeah, no worries
Right.
about mixing up at all with something like that.
Yes.
With that really short beak like that, do you feed them just regular pigeon seed, or do you have to get like a crumbler or anything like that broken down more for them, or can they handle seeds?
There is a seed for them. It's called short face mix. They can basically eat any kind of seed as long as it's not so big. Like they can't eat like regular corn size, and some type of peas will choke the short face birds. So you got to be careful that they're not like peas for human consumption and stuff like that, like beans and big peas. But there are certain peas that they can eat, like mung peas, little white peas. They can eat another thing too. They can eat is called Australian peas. This is one source that when I'm hand raising baby short faces, I have a instrument here that I call it a pea shooter. It's 12 inches long. It has like a bubble on the bottom. And this bubble is handmade. This is something that the breeders make. I made this. I forgot what it's called when you go buy it, but what it is what parents use to draw the mucus from the baby's nose.
Okay, yeah.
Right. This is what we use. So what I do is take a tube, clear tubing, like for a fish tank that is solid tube, and it's maybe like a quarter in diameter by 12 inches long. And then at one end of the tube, I score it with a hacksaw and I make an X on it, or a plus, like it looks like a plus. Then I run it over my the stove, and I take that end of the tube with a pair of gloves or a spoon or something, and I make sure that I make the all four corners meet inside, so that when I put it back into that little bubble, and it's inside there nice and tight, when I draw water, and then I put a handful of peas down that tube, the peas do not fall back into the bubble because there's a block down there. That's what I use to feed when I'm hand rearing short-faced tumblers. And I only use peas at that time. And it's very successful.
What's their temperament like? Being a showbird, are they pretty easy to handle?
Well, like most birds, if you handle your birds and your birds are not afraid of you, and you fire the beaks constantly, like every time, because these birds do require some grooming and some maintenance. So you handle these birds as much as possible so that when they go to the show, they're not afraid of the judge and like running away and all skittish and all that. No, you don't want that. You want the bird to be tame as possible. So when they're going to be handled, there's no fuss. So that's pretty good when the birds are easily to handle. Not only that, they show better when they're tame too, because now I'm going to give you a scenario. A couple of years ago, I entered a whole bunch of pigeons because I'm also a member of the American Short-Faced Club, and that club shows at Lancaster. So I had brought a bunch of English short-faced tumblers. I brought English short-faced tumbler ballheads and English short-faced tumbler cells. When they called the cells, the judge says, okay, send up all the cells. Student went and got all the cells. Those are all the solid color birds. He brought them up there. I knew my birds because I know them right away. As soon as he put all my birds together in the big mix where the show pen was going to be at, one of my birds just stood out like a sore thumb. He started performing as soon as he got in there. He was dancing, he was trotting, he was going all around, he was cocking off, he was showing off. And the judge said, wow, I mean, look at this bird here. He didn't even get to pick him up. He said, oh, wow, look at this bird here. He hasn't stood still since he's been here. He's a show-off. And not only he's a show-off, I don't have a reason to pick anyone else but him. Look at him. He is the best here. His performance was outstanding. I won with that one. So one of those awards that you called out before came from that guy, and I still have him.
What age do you start doing the cage training and show cage training?
Let's say you're going to bring the young birds into a young bird show. You don't have to worry too much about that because the judges know that all these birds are young birds and they're inexperienced. So they can be flighty or they could be docile. It doesn't matter with that. And another thing too, it doesn't matter that they're fully feathered because young birds are usually not fully feathered so they mature and molted out.
And you mentioned that you're a member of, was it the American Short-Faced Club?
And the Empire.
Is that a local club or is that a state club?
The Empire, it's been established since 1947. And I've been a member from that club for maybe 7 years. The American Short-Faced, I've been a member maybe for 5 years in that club. Here's what happened. I've been breeding and keeping short-faced pigeons for a long time. I just never wanted to join the club because I was not really interested in showing. So when I really decided to join the club, it was because I was interested in getting their bands on my birds. It was my promotion. You know, I wanted it to promote my birds, and I wanted them to have a band that came from a club with a good reputation on shortface. So I joined the Empire Shortface Tumbler Club.
Are there any national or international clubs for the short face breeds?
Oh yeah, sure. There's international shows and everything up in Europe, but here in the United States, what we do is the Empire Shortface Tumbler. Well, that's not what it's called now. That was the original name. It's not what it's called now. Is the Empire Shortface Club, because now we don't only cover tumblers, we cover different breeds of short faces. We have the American short face as well, and all these clubs. Here's what they do: they participate in the Grand Nationals and Lancasters and shows like that.
Yeah, so if someone's interested in getting into this breed, joining one of those clubs would probably be the best way to start, wouldn't you say?
It'll be a great idea to pick some brains there and get to know some people that have experience with these breeds. They can teach you the in and outs of the breeds. If you want to, because there's a lot of objectives. There's people that get involved with short faces because they like them, and they're not necessarily interested in showing. And there's guys that are like me that are interested in showing because I love competing and I love winning. So I gotta do the best thing for the breed too, you know, by breeding the best I can.
Did you ever have a mentor when you first got started in this breed?
I had a lot of trials and errors at one point, but I did learn a lot more when I joined the club. When I joined the Empire, there's guys there. We have a lot of master breeders there that became friends with, and guys that I can call and ask them for, you know, these guys have way more experience with showing than I do. And also with breeding, because there's, you know, you can't, when it comes to these birds, you just don't know everything, you know, there's still a lot to learn. So it's a great start to, I say one of the best things to do is come down to the club, join the club, buy some birds there, support the club in any way you can, and learn, because I think experience with the breed is probably the best teacher. Getting some experience. Nobody can teach you that. You get hands-on is probably the best.
Right, yeah. You just got to do it.
Yeah. And then ask questions, of course. Ask questions. What are the obstacles in breeding? You know, what do you suggest is the best foster parents and stuff like that? And there's a lot of different opinions, but they're mostly all good.
Yeah, especially if you're talking to someone who's in the club, who's been around this breed for years. You know, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. If you can, you know, get some help like that, that'd be really good.
Absolutely.
All righty. Well, we're coming up against the clock, but I really appreciate your time and coming on and sharing all your knowledge and experience with us and talking about this really cool breed.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the All About Pigeons podcast. Please help the pigeon hobby by telling your fellow club members or other pigeon friends about the podcast, and make sure to leave a good review or at least a 5-star for the podcast wherever you listen. If you have a topic or a person you want to hear more about on the podcast, or if you yourself would like to be a guest, just send an email to allaboutpigeonspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Welcome to the All About Pigeons podcast, brought to you by the All About Pigeons nonprofit organization, which is dedicated to promoting education and promotion of the pigeon hobby. Every week, a listener requests to drive our conversations about all things pigeons. Join me, Philip Fry, as we learn and share stories about these incredible birds in this ancient hobby. Today, we're going to be talking about a very unique breed, the Zitterhalls, with Elsbeth Hamilton. She's been breeding Zitterhalls since 2016. She's a member of the NPA, the Rare Breeds Club, as well as the American Zitterhawk. Elsbeth, thanks for coming on and talking with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Because this is kind of a off-the-side sort of breed, not really well known. Just a real quick introduction. Tell them, you know, what this bird looks like, what this bird is, for those who don't know.
So my best description for this bird would be a really thin, long-legged, long neck, and trim bird. They've got really tight plumage, and what they're known for specifically is the way they'll shake their neck back and forth It's very rapid. It tends to have a pretty wide vibration back and forth. And so they look almost anorexic thin compared to other pigeons. They're very unique.
If you're not familiar with this bird, definitely, at least Google it while you're listening to this episode. A picture doesn't really do it justice, and I'm going to come forward right now, just get this out of the way. When I first saw it, it was on like one of those NPE posters, with all the different breeds. And I was just like, oh, cool. It's a bird with a crooked neck next, and that's all I thought about it. Like I was just, every time I saw a picture of a zitter hall, I just thought they just had a stationary crooked neck. And it wasn't until, I saw one and I saw the motion and everything else. And I was just like, oh man, that's cool. Like it was, it's a performance in that way. And I was really hooked on it at that point. That's really, really neat.
That's what drew me into. I mean, no pictures and videos can almost do it justice, but there's nothing like seeing them in person and just seeing how they perform. It's just so wild. They're almost awkward looking.
Yeah. Yeah. And just when watching them just interact with other birds, watching them, interact with each other and stuff, it's because they're always kind of doing it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So can you give us a little bit of a background of where, what the history of this breed is and where they come from?
So this is a very old German breed. It originates around the Polish border, what currently is the Polish border up by the sea in Germany. Around the 1700s is when they estimate they first started noticing the breed. So they're pretty old. No one's really sure what went into creating them. They believe they had some high flyers mixed in based on how they tend to fly. Some people have mixed tumbler in as well, but they've just kind of been from that region and they're known as the Stargard Shaker. Sometimes there's some discrepancy in the names there, but they're from that Stargard region. They've just been this long, trim bird since then.
That's right. I forgot they do go by another name, and it's Stargard, and that's the name of like the town or region.
Yep, name of the town. There are some discrepancies there. I believe they were looking at potentially renaming them over in Germany to the Stargard Dolphin, but I'm not sure how official that is yet.
So when it comes to handling this breed, are they a little bit on the flighty side, or are they a pretty docile breed?
They're rather flighty. Sometimes you can get them to tame down, but they just have a very nervous nature about them. And I think that's intentional with the way they perform. The more nervous they tend to be, the more that they have the tremble, the neck shaking, which helps them show better. They're more exciting to watch and perform.
So maybe it's best not to cage train and just let them get their first show experience to be kind of nerve wracking and get them to really shake them, huh?
Mm-hmm. I personally have not done cage training. I didn't have a whole lot of success with it, comparing it to having them go to their first show of the season and seeing how they progress. The cage training, they tended to tame down a little bit, where they would almost get lazy in the cage, where they would just lay there if someone came up. They wouldn't really perform or do the tremble like the others would.
Oh wow! So that is part of the technique. I saw some of yours at the Grand National, and every time you walk up to the cage, they were performing very well. They were quite a sight to see.
Thank you.
So when it comes to getting a bird ready for a show and everything like that, what are some of the steps that you take when it comes to prepping and conditioning this breed before a show?
The biggest thing for them is making sure that they're healthy. A big thing within the Zitter Hall specifically is that we have a rather limited population. We don't have a whole lot of breeders out there to have the population to be diverse enough to have a very rigorous, healthy bird. So they tend to be a little bit more prone to some of the diseases. They're pretty tight feathered, so mite and louse treatments don't tend to be necessary. Sometimes I've been wanting to start doing some vaccinations to see if that'll help with some of the rigor there. But the main thing is making sure they have the feed quality. With how tight and trim their feathers are, you want to make sure they're in the best quality possible. So at least a couple months before show, starting them on a more conditioner type feed. That way they can get a good healthy molt through before show season starts.
What kind of feed are you giving them during that time?
During that time, I tend to try to feed a balanced mix. Sometimes I like to use the Des Moines feed company. It's a little bit far from where I'm at with raising my birds, but I found that it's worth it. They tend to be a little picky sometimes, so we avoid mixes that use peas in them. So keeping the protein levels at least 15% or so, if not a little bit higher, making sure they've got enough fats in there to help keep their oils and keep their nice sheen, particularly on some of the darker colored birds, and just making sure they've got a nice balanced diet to keep everything in good condition.
And with that tight feather, you're mentioning that not everything works as effectively when it comes to mites and lice and stuff like that. What have you found that does work well with that type of feather on these birds?
I personally have not had too big of issues with it. So what I found that works best is using some bath salts in it. I buy it from Foy's Pigeon Supplies, and I'll mix that into their bathing water. It's fine for them to drink as well, and that seems to be the best preventative, as well as just regular cleaning and making sure that the loft isn't too full of dust, isn't getting overly dirty. So keeping everything clean where possible and having the bath salts really help.
Are you putting that in with like every time they're taking the bath, or is that just kind of like a monthly or every 2 month treatment?
I tend to do it a little bit more often. Where I've got my birds, they have access to the outdoors, so there's the potential for wild birds to sit outside the cage, maybe feathers blow in and have that transmission. So I do it once a week or so, just in case.
Can you talk a little bit about your loft setup for this type of breed? Are you doing an open loft, or do you have nesting boxes where you control who's pairing up with who and what your loft setup is like?
So it's a little bit of a mixture. It's an old refrigeration cooling unit from a production factory that we converted. It's nice and open, stainless steel, so we can wash it down really good. And we hung chicken nesting boxes from the wall way up high. I don't really try to force pair bonds. I've tried it with some of them. Sometimes I can get the pair bonds to stick, other times I can't. So I tend to let them pair up at random. And then outside, they've got a 12 by 10 by 8 feet tall flight area where they've got perches along the walls. It's fully open air. We've got some different types of enrichment in there. We've got an old Christmas tree in there, one of the old pines that they like to climb in sometimes. They'll break off the boughs and take them inside for nesting. So a lot of what we've done for it is repurposing other things to try and make it the best we can for what they need.
So is that a stainless steel floor?
Yep, stainless steel floor. It's got a grate in the middle. So once or twice a year, we'll pull out the grate. We've got a door system where we can lock them all outside or lock them all inside. So we'll shoo them all outdoors, do the cleaning, get everything sanitized, and then let them all come back in, and vice versa when we do cleaning outside.
Okay, so it has a great floor where everything, all the droppings and everything are falling through the bottom then.
Yep. And then there's a channel at the front that will fill with water sometimes if it's been extra muddy outdoors or they're just not looking as clean as they should. We'll fill that to help provide some more extra bathing room for everyone.
With powders having like an extra large crop, and this breed with like the vibrating neck like that, does this breed have any kind of specific health issues associated with that? I mean, I know you mentioned before about just the overall genetic pool's kind of low, and there's that, but does the shaking neck bring up any kind of issues?
I personally have not encountered any. They've been a very healthy, robust breed for me, other than the common diseases or quick illnesses. So fortunately, I have not had any major problems there.
How do they do when it comes to breeding and raising on their own?
They are great parents. I have had pairs raise out 3 squabs in a nest, and all 3 will fill out healthy, will raise all 3 the same size. I've noticed in some other breeds that they tend to favor one squab over the other. The Zitterhalls don't have that problem. They're very good about raising 2 squabs together or more. I've had success having ones from other breeds. My sister raises figuritas, which are not the best parents, and they've successfully foster parented for those. So they are incredible feeders. I know several other people use them specifically for feeding either homers or other breeds just because they're so good at being parents.
And when it comes to pairing up and breeding, they're pretty prolific in that aspect as well.
Yes, they are very prolific. I mean, I probably get at least 6 to 7 nests out per year, if not more, from a pair. When
Oh, wow.
when they've decided it's time to start nesting in the spring, they are full force ready for it, and they don't stop until it starts getting pretty cold again.
Pretty good for a showbird. I mean, that's like racing homer style right there on a showbird.
Mm-hmm. No, it's very impressive. So when I started out, I started with 6 pairs, and within probably a year and a half, I was up to 60 birds or more. It was rather insane.
Well, that's good. I mean, yeah, especially if you're playing with some of the different colors and you are trying to breed to a certain standard.
Mm-hmm.
And what are some of the colors that come in this breed?
If you can dream of it, they probably come in that color.
Oh, okay.
So in the US, we don't have a whole lot of the pattern type. We don't see a lot of check birds very often. Occasionally you'll see a bar, but the main colors that people tend to stick with and stay true to are the reds, the yellows. You'll get some almonds here and there, and the blacks. I've had some different things come together from the odd pairings that'll come. So I've had duns, I've had a variety of just honestly, it's so hard to tell what you would even call the color a lot of times.
Can you talk a little bit about the breed standard and how the points are assigned to that?
So the majority of the points are looking at the body of the bird, making sure that they are slim, trim. We want a really small, thin neck and really long, thin legs. They need to have a nice horizontal tail carriage. We want them to look as almost soldier like, is a way I would describe it. And then there's a lot of points awarded as well into the tremble, the neck shake. They need to have an angular head. I would consider it almost a trapezoid shape. So a nice flat slanted forehead, flat across the top, then angles across the back. There are points assigned as well to the eye color, which should be a nice pearl white, and their eye sear, which should also be a nice pale, kind of very light pink color, or almost white. So they want them to look as striking as possible with these features. Very angular, very not bright, but trying to keep it across the same and make them look just striking, make them look nervous almost.
When you are trying to work towards this standard, out of that list that you just presented, is there any one thing in particular that like you're maybe you specifically or you see this breed here in the States kind of needing more improvement on?
So, one of the biggest things right now is the red eye sear. That's kind of come in with some different breeds that have been brought in to create more of the dramatic and striking features. They will have a red eye sear. So, we're trying to breed that out and make them much more pale looking, as well as making sure they have that pearl eye color. Sometimes you can get sort of the cracks of orange peeking through, and so cutting that out wherever possible helps get you closer to the standard. It's hard to start with a bird that has short legs and short necks, which is what used to be more common in the States, to what we see now as being our standard for the American Zitterhall Club. Very long neck, very long legs. So it's slow progress there, but making sure that we're building the barn. We're not just going to paint the sides of it. We got to have that good station, making sure they're nice and horizontal. The eye color, the eye sear, and trying to elongate that neck and elongate those legs as a continuing project. We need to make sure we've got those other features right first.
Is the standard that the American Zitterhall Club uses the same standard that is used like in Europe?
It's slightly different what is published now for the Zitterhall standard. So in other countries, there are different standards. Australia has their own, Europe, each country in Europe really has their own. Some countries will only show certain colors. The American Zitterhall Club hasn't really decided or determined where we're going with colors yet, if we're going to only have color classes or if we're more focused on the type. So a lot of the stock that's being brought in now, what we're seeing for those really long necks and long legs in the States, comes from Germany. So we're slowly adopting more and more of the German standard, but it's a work in progress still.
Does the NPA have a standard in the on this breed?
Yes, they do.
Oh, okay. It sounds like they're a little bit flighty, but they also reproduce really well. So there's a lot of give and take. Would you recommend this as a show breed for beginners?
It depends on the age of the beginner. If they're willing to work with a breed that's flighty and accept the risks of that, absolutely. They are great parents. They're pretty hardy against disease. You don't have to worry as much about all of the different feather parasites that you would get with some of the other breeds like Medinas or others that might be a little bit on the easier side for beginners. But if it's a younger kid that maybe wants something that's docile, friendly, will come up to you and have that personality and want to interact with you, Zitterhalls probably are not the bird for them.
So we mentioned the American Zitterhall Club, and if someone is interested in getting in touch or joining that club and finding out more about this breed, where can they find out more, and where's the contact for that?
So the group currently has a Facebook page. It's called the American Zitterhall Club. You've got to be approved to join, but they're pretty good about that. And Brad Endel is the president. He's the one who's really been putting in all of the work on the Zitterhall breed when trying to build the club. And he's spearheading getting this all put together. So he's brought over birds from Germany and has really established what the club hopes to work towards is having that German standard. He is a fountain of information on that. John Navant out in Colorado is also a great fountain of information. He is currently the master breeder for Zitterhalls and is a great resource for anything related to them.
And I understand you guys are going to be at the Louisville Youngbird Show.
Yep, that's correct. That'll be the first Zitterhall show, where it's just going to be Zitterhalls. They'll be separate from all the other groups and will be on their own, and it'll be a great time.
Do you have any estimate about how many birds you guys will be bringing there?
I'm guessing at least 25. I'm not really sure on who all plans to attend yet, but it should be a great show.
Yeah, that's a pretty good start right there.
It's fortunate. A lot of the breeders for Zitterhalls tend to be more in the Midwest, so it's not too far for everyone to kind of commute in and show. We typically show at the Des Moines Pigeon Show as well, Pigeons on the Prairie. Last year we had almost 30 Zitterhalls there.
Oh, wow.
That was kind of what really started everything in motion, is that we had enough birds that we could have our own show and really make sure that the judge is for sure familiar with the breed, and we're all kind of learning together as to where we're taking it from there.
Did you guys come together through the Rare Breeds Pigeon Club?
That's how it started. That's how I started with the Zitterhalls as well. I got mine in 2016 at the Des Moines show from a Rare Breeds Club member, and that's what really started things rolling. Started working with Brad, and each year just seeing where the breed's going, what direction, what we have to do to improve it. Me specifically trying to get my birds up to what would be able to compete with Brad's birds, and making sure that we are creating a seamless standard, so we're having uniformity there.
That's so good. I mean, that's like a success story for the breed, though. It's on that verge, falling into obscurity with becoming a rare breed. And then anytime a breed has a club behind it, it just does so much better. You guys are working on a standard, and that's going to solidify what this breed looks like in the future. That's really, really huge to have that club behind the breed. And you guys are going to be at the show supporting it. People are going to see that. Congratulations on that. That's going to be really fantastic to see you guys out there at the shows.
Thank you. And I really think the shows are where it counts to get people introduced to the breed, because as we've said before, if you don't see it in person, you'd never believe it.
I just thought it was a bird with a crooked neck.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting people to where they can see it and wonder. There's just this novelty to the Zitterhalls. They're so goofy, they're awkward looking, they're so different from other pigeon breeds that seeing them in person brings people in. They start to think about them. They learn about how easy the breed is and how relatively simple they are to care for compared to others. And I think it's really going to help as long as we can keep getting them to where the public can see them, where people can get involved and witness them. The club's going to really have some good growth.
Anybody's going to be going to the Louisville Youngbird Show, make sure to stop by and check out those Zitterhalls. And if you're interested in the breed, check out their Facebook, the American Zitterhall Club. You can learn more from all these breeders and find out more if you're interested. But Elspeth, thanks so much for coming on and talking Zitterhalls with us today. This has been fun.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to another listener-requested episode of the All About Pigeons podcast. We truly appreciate your support. The soundtrack for the show comes from the pigeon musician Vitel Mizraim. If you have a topic or a guest you'd like to hear more about in future episodes, or if you yourself would like to be a guest and just talk pigeons, please don't hesitate to reach out to us through email at allaboutpigeonspodcast@gmail.com or join our Facebook page, All About Pigeons Podcast, and connect with us there. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review wherever you listen. It supports the pigeon hobby and really helps the show. Remember, together the hobby thrives. Support each other and enjoy your pigeons. Hello and welcome to the All About Pigeons podcast. We have a very special episode for you today, so stick around. Today we're going to talk about the breed Lahores. We have Caden Jessing with us. Caden is the admin of the Lahore Facebook group. He's also the Eastern District Director of the North American Lahore Club. He's also a certified rare breeds judge and master breeder of Damascenes through the Rare Breeds Club. And today we're going to talk about Lahores. Thanks for coming on and talking with us, Caden.
Hey, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Has it always been Lahores for you, or what were some of the first pigeons that you got introduced to?
So the first pigeons I ever had, some mutts that I got from an auction. I had gone up with my grandfather. He used to be really big in racing, so he was always racing the homers and flying them and such. And, I was going to get started up with some homing pigeons and start racing, and he ended up passing away before we could do that. I went up to the auction that we used to go to, and, I saw some fantails, some garden fans in a cage, and I was like, I think I need to get some of those. So, I started off with some white garden fantails, and that kind of sparked everything for me.
So when did you first start getting into the Lahores?
The Lahores came about a year later. I went down to, we have a big national poultry show in Columbus, Ohio, the Ohio National. I was showing some poultry there. I never did great with my poultry, but I noticed a pair of black Lahores in a sale cage. I was like, wow, they're huge. They looked like bowling balls. And I was like, I think I'm going to get these. I paid, I think, $40 for the pair. I named the male George. I brought him home, and man, they were just the coolest thing. I thought they looked like, penguins with the black and white. Yeah, they were my first Lahores I bought. That was 2014, I believe.
When you're looking at the different birds and stuff in a picture, you can't really, there's nothing to scale there for their size. Like how big are these birds? You just said that they're pretty good sized birds. What are they compared to like a racing homer?
I would say they're pretty big compared to a racer. I would say a little smaller than a runt, but there's runt blood and Carno. Those are some things that they bred into them. So they're about, I'd say if you ever seen a show Carno, I'd say they're about that size, maybe a little longer, a little bigger.
So those are some of the breeds that go into it. What more can you tell us about the origin of this breed?
The origin is actually really interesting. I've heard it told a couple different ways. I hear from the older guys, oh, they're from Lahore, Pakistan, which on paper makes a lot of sense. Lahore, Pakistan, that they're in India. But I did some digging and I really wanted to kind of get some more info on that. And I ended up looking at Levi's The Pigeon. I don't know if you've ever heard of The Pigeon.
Oh yeah.
That's something I turn to often. And it was interesting because they said that, they were introduced in England in 1925, but they did some deeper digging and they found out that they were actually introduced in 1855. So that was way before. They were called tailors back then.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they traced them back to India. That's where they imported them out of Lahore, Pakistan. In Lahore, they don't call them Lahores. They call them Shirazi, or in more of like southern India, they call them Shiraji, and that originates from Shiraz in Persia, which is modern day Iran, and that dates all the way back to the 16th century. Like these are some old pigeons, and they're depicted on artwork. It's really neat to see. I got to see some of that artwork. They got to England and they came to Germany in about 1911. Couldn't find an exact date as to when they came to North America. I found out that they orchestrated the Lahore Breeders Association. So that was organized in 1949. And then there was a branch off the club called the Central Lahore Club. That was in 1953. And they had this huge show at Des Moines. They had 16 exhibitors with 118 birds, which is insane because I go to Des Moines, I've been going for the last 5 years, and it's me and maybe two people that show now. And just to hear that there were 16 exhibitors and 118 birds is crazy to me.
When was that?
That was in 1953. Once that kind of got established, there was another branch off the Central Lahore Club. It sounded like the Central Lahore Club kind of like faded into the background, and they produced the American Lahore Club in 1955 in Des Moines.
Is the Lahore considered a rare breed?
No, the Lahore, since it had more of a following and since there was a club, they're not considered rare breeds.
Oh, okay. I've heard these birds are pretty calm. Is that pretty much the case with all of them that you have come across?
With all the experience that I have over the years, I say that they're pretty calm. They're pretty tame birds. They don't really fly away from me when I go into the loft. I have heard on occasion, oh, well, these birds are wild and they fly around and whatever. And it's kind of what you keep them with or what they're reared with. Because if you rear your Lahores with, let's say, starlings or archangels, something that's really flighty, they take off and spook pretty easy, then I would say, yeah, they could be pretty flighty. But yeah, in my experience, I've always kind of kept them with their own breed. And once they're kind of tamed down, then I could maybe throw some starlings in there that or damascenes that, they can do their own thing, but the Lahores themselves are fairly calm. And they actually have some points in the standard that state that, there's some floating points, I would say. They could be knocked down if they don't have that temperament. If they're a little mean or if they're really flighty in the cage trying to get out, then they can take those points into consideration.
So what is your loft setup like? Do you have a loft just specifically for them, or did you say you might put some other breeds in there with them as well?
Yeah, I have a couple different lofts. I have probably about 4 or 5 different lofts.
Nice.
And that's kind of like during the show season, I use more. Like in the wintertime, I'm only utilizing 3 different lofts. My main one is an old milk parlor. My grandpa, he used to be a dairy farmer. I would always go and play in the milk house, and they had these troughs that they would come lead the cows up so they could eat while you were milking the cows. And I was like, well, these look like great nest boxes. I mean, there's like 6, there's 3 on one side and 3 on the other side. I'm like, they're already built in. I turned my grandpa's milk parlor into a pigeon loft. And that's where I keep most of my Lahores at. And I only keep about 20 birds in there. And then I built the loft that extends outside so they can go out, get sunlight, take baths out there, get some fresh air and stuff. That's kind of an important thing I've learned over the years, was to keep the loft, like you got to keep air flowing through there, because if it gets damp or moist, then that's good place for bacteria, place for stuff to fester.
What kind of flooring is in that?
It's cement. Yep. So I mean, it gets cold, and it's not the best. To be honest, it's not the best place to keep pigeons. Just based on that, I have a fan in there, and we constantly are keeping an eye on that. I would rather honestly have them on dirt or at least sawdust.
Conversion lofts. What are you gonna
Right.
do?
Yeah.
It works and you can make it work and everyone's healthy, so that's what counts.
Exactly. I mean, I was 14 and I was like, this is what I've got and I'm going to utilize what I have.
Yeah.
And I've moved to some better loft areas that I keep my other birds in now. And it's the milk parlor is kind of just a catch-all or a quarantine space or.
So let's talk about like the showing, getting these birds ready to show. You have these other lofts. Are you putting these birds, kind of giving them a lot more space? Is that what you use them for?
Yeah, I like to use one of my other pens as a conditioning. So the main shows I am worried about are Louisville, the National Young Bird Show, mainly because I got to hatch out my birds early because they are so big that they just need more time to fill out. I'm constantly checking to see, first off, do they have the right markings? If they have the right markings, then they move to the next pen. Once I get them, into that grow out pen, I can kind of monitor them and, vaccinate when I need to and kind of grow them out. By the start of the show season for the young birds, I have my show team, and that's kind of where they stay. And that way I don't have to intermingle them with my breeders and my other birds that I have at home, because then I'm coming to a show and from a show, and I don't want to introduce anything to my breeding stock. I don't want to jeopardize them.
So you're pulling them, making sure the colors are good, moving them forward, kind of get their own space and feather out. Do you do any sort of supplements or anything like that to help them for the traveling?
I don't really use a whole lot of supplements. People like to put vinegar in the water, or I've heard people use bleach, or I don't usually use a whole lot of it. I use a little bit of vinegar here and there, but I don't really put anything crazy into the water. I mean, there's no real evidence to support that vinegar or bleach really has any beneficial properties to it. There's nothing just backing it. People put bleach in their waters it keeps the container clean, I guess. But yeah, I don't usually use any supplements.
What do you vaccinate for?
I vaccinate for PMV, and that is the only thing that I vaccinate for. I've heard of other people vaccinating for different, strains of things. And in my experience, the only problems that I've had were with PMV. I had PMV once, it wiped out a bunch of birds. I had to basically start over. So I was like, well, not going to make that mistake again. Got to vaccinate.
That's always a hard lesson to learn, but it definitely sticks when you get it.
It definitely sets you back a couple of years.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Are there any breed specific health issues that Lahores have?
I can't really think of anything, to be honest with you. I don't think there's anything specific or detrimental to the Lahores that isn't to anything else that you raise.
No common issues that you've been running into?
Not really. If there's any issues, it's usually, I guess, fertility. I have been known to use some vitamin E supplements to make sure that I'm getting the right fertility. I used to trim my birds. I used to cut the tail down and make sure that everything's happening the way it should be, and I'm getting the right fertility out of them. It's hard once you're breeding for a big bird. Some people try to make them bigger, and you end up having those issues that you might not have with a smaller bird.
So do you have to trim the tails then, or was that just something that you were doing at the time to increase your fertility and get a better breeding season?
Yeah, I used to trim the tails a lot, and then I kind of did a year without it and realized there wasn't a whole lot of change. But also, I know that when I started, my birds were very long in the body, like in the tail and wings. They kind of stretched out probably 3.5 inches, which the standard calls for a lot shorter. I think it's like 1.5 inches past the wings. So I started breeding for shorter birds, which I think in turn helped my fertility.
So how are they as far as parents go? You don't have to foster, right? They'll take care of their own.
Yeah, I really don't do any fostering with the Lahores. They raise their own babies. I think the only thing that you need to take into consideration is how much space, because Lahores are big. They can be a little territorial around their areas. They don't want another bird perching on their nest box or anything like that. So since they're big, they're going to take over a decent amount of space. So just making sure you have that available to them, I think is your best way of producing more offspring.
What kind of nest box setups do you have in your loft?
I have a couple different kinds, just kind of things I've gotten over the years. I've gotten some old tower nest boxes. There's like a top part, a middle part, and a bottom part. I found that those aren't the best, again, because Lahores are big and they're a little territorial over their area. So when I say that, they're not like trying to kill each other. They're just like, hey, stay out of my space. But the other ones I use those troughs in the milk parlor, which seemed to work pretty well because they were pretty far distance from each other. But mainly just kind of random crates, things I would find at the supermarket, or those, the milk crate. I find that they like those.
That's a good size box right there.
Yeah, no, it is a decent size.
For a fancy breed, it seems like they're pretty good at reproducing on their own and no major health issues. And being tame, I mean, it sounds like this would be a pretty good starter fancy breed for a new fancier.
Oh, definitely. I know a lot of people who started off on Lahores and then moved on to something else, because they're really just tame and pretty docile. I mean, they kind of sit there and do their own thing, and they get up and they breed and they produce their own offspring and they feed their own offspring. And so I started on them and I kept them, and I did pick up a couple other breeds, but that's something that's never really wavered, is just keeping Lahores. They're really great, and I wish more people would end up showing them.
When I first saw Lahores, it was the color pattern. It was real striking, the different colors, but just the way the pattern's laid out on the bird.
Absolutely.
What was it that drew you into them, and what was some of the characteristics that you really liked about them when you first came across them?
I think it was the pattern that really got me too. That kind of half moon, kind of like the crescent around the eyes, from the eyes around the head to the chest. That's the only bird in North America that I know of that is here that has that marking, besides the Shirazi, which the original bird can tend to have those little marks on them. Basically, they're relatives, so I don't really count that. But there's another bird in Australia. I think it's the Australian tumbler. They also have that same marking. The body's a little different. I would say the markings are kind of what got me, and the contrast between the black and the white really just draws me in. I mean, they look stunning in a show cage.
I especially like the black and whites. I mean, I had magpies for a while, and it was that pattern, that black and white pattern. I think that looks really, really neat. What are some of the other colors that you can get in the Lahores?
There's a lot more colors now than what there used to be. The originals were black, red, yellow, lavender. So I would say those four, and then I would say brown came along, and then your bars and checks. So that was kind of the base. And then once we started kind of crossing them into the Carno and to the Runt, different things like that, the more colors were brought in. I know I've seen grizzles, I've seen indigos. Somebody else, they introduced Modena bronze into them, which I'm all for adding some colors because I love some genetics. That's great. However, I wish it was a different breed and not Lahores, because they added a Modena. They crossed Modena to a Lahore. And one of the biggest faults that I have in my birds is that tail will go straight up in the air, and I need it to be on the ground. And that drives me insane. That is one of the faults that it's upsetting, because you work so hard and you finally have a perfectly marked bird, and then that tail sticks up in the air and you're like, geez. Oh, and that is one difficult thing about Lahores. They're depicted, they're the bird of beauty. That's our little slogan with them. They are difficult to raise good birds. And when I say that, I mean putting the markings on a nice structured bird. They need to have a nice back skull. They need to have a good body, tail set to the 45-degree angle to the floor. So once you finally get that structure down, and then you're fighting your pied markings. They say, I've heard that there's 3 different markings. Some say there's 4. You're basically fighting the pied marking to make sure that you're getting that correct line around the eyes to the front of the wing butt. And I could see why, that might turn some people away, because you have to breed a couple of them to make sure that you're getting the right patterns you need. And you're trying to breed to opposite markings and opposite faults to have a really nice marked bird and a good, body on it. For a tail to go up in the air is a little, it's not for the faint of heart, but they are super easy to breed, and I think that's what draws people to them.
That's the nature of the beast when it comes to adding colors and into a bird that you're going to be showing. It's challenging in that way, but hey, you got a breed that can reproduce easily and doesn't take a lot of fostering work and stuff like that, then that'd be pretty fun.
Absolutely.
Can you give us how the points break down for scoring this bird?
The biggest amount of points are the markings and the design of the bird. So that's about 25 points. So you really, you're trying to get that marking around the head, and you're trying to keep the white with the white and the black with the black, or any other color you have. And then you go down to about the head and the neck. That's 20 points. So you want that nice broad head, and you want a thicker neck on them. The body and size is next. So you want a nice sized bird. You don't want anything that's, Homer sized. You just want that kind of nice roundness to the front of the chest, the body that flows into the rest of the bird. And then carriage and station is next. And that's the tail thing I talked about. You want that body, that 45-degree angle that just kind of slopes to the floor. Next is color, which, some people are really strict about color. I am one of those people. And that's kind of some of my downfall, is I would rather see a really, really nice colored bird and that's just my genetics past kind of talking. And it's not that many points. It's 10 points. If you have a nice structured bird and you throw it away because it has one black feather in the tail, you kind of have to pick your battles. And that's one thing I'm working with right now in the Lahores is I'm working with a color that not a lot of people work with. I would say that it probably appears in people's lofts and they're like, oh, like that's weird, and then they kind of sell it, or sometimes people show them. But I work with lavender on a barred bird. Mainly when you see lavenders, they're on spread, which is just a solid spread black. A spread black is what you normally see them in as the lavenders. But I took that and I bred a spread lavender to a blue bar. I took one of my best clean shielded blue bars and I crossed it with a lavender, and then I got some offspring that were, you can kind of see a bar showing through, and you get blacks first because my blue bars weren't split for Milky. Milky is autosomal. I was getting a lot of like blacks that kind of show a bar in them. And then I just kept working at it. And I've been working on it for probably 5 years now, maybe 6. And I've had some help from a couple other breeders. I've now got a bird that is lavender with a clean, crisp lavender bar on them. I just think that's the most striking thing in the world. The thing that I'm working on now is the problem was I kind of painted the house before I built it. I'm trying to add some of this other blood into to kind of build that bird back up. And I think I'm making some progress, and I'm pretty happy with my result. I don't think they're going to beat a black or a lavender anytime soon in the shows, but I just enjoy having the breed and raising them, and having a little friendly competition.
And so you are the district director of the North American Lahore Club. And can you talk a little bit about that club? Do you guys have members pretty evenly distributed around the country?
I was the central and the eastern district director for a couple of years. And now I'm just the eastern district director. So I take care of, Ohio, Michigan, kind of south and then east of there. So I've got my own states that I try to hold meets in. So I hold a meet every year at Louisville, Kentucky for the National Young Bird Show. And then I always try to get at Lancaster, but it's always kind of a hard conflict between Lancaster or the National. And if I'm planning on the National, then I don't usually go to Lancaster. And if I go to Lancaster, I can't go to the National. It's kind of trying to get those shows set up. The majority of our breeders, I would say our master breeders, would be out down southwest. I've got friends in Oklahoma that have a lot of Lahores. A lot of them are master breeders out that way. And, they've really been a foundation that I've kind of built my stock off of. I also have a friend up in Des Moines, Iowa. He goes to that show and he's helped me a lot with my birds as well. And I'd say we don't have a ton of members on the eastern side of the United States, but down south, that is pretty much the home of where, they're holding these bigger meets.
Will you be going to the Gun National Show in Oklahoma?
Unfortunately, I had a wedding come up, one of my friends, so I won't be able to make it to the National. I was planning on it, which is upsetting because I didn't schedule anything for Lancaster because I was like banking on the National, and then, life happens, I guess. So
So does the North American Lahore Club, will they be at something like the Young Bird Show and stuff like that? Will they be set up there?
The Lahore Club will be set up at the National. We are always set up at the Louisville Young Bird Show. But yeah, every National we have a meet.
Is there an international club too for this breed, or is it just the national club that you know about?
So not to my knowledge, I know that we accept foreign, club memberships.
Oh, right
So
on.
I guess, maybe it's us.
Right.
But I guess that would mean it's us. Yeah, we do accept, I think it's $25 a membership for foreign. Our family memberships are 25, juniors are 10, and adults are 20.
Well, there you go. If you guys are interested in the Lahores, they got a national club, which is always really, it's just healthy for the breed. You got other breeders out there to help you out, guide you along. They have a Facebook.
Our Facebook is the North American Lahore Club. I am an admin of that. John is also an admin. Our club members are very, active on there. I know our secretary Virgil is on there, and Steve Biebrich is on there. He's our Southern District Director. He's, he likes all the posts on there, and his son Adam is also on there. So if anyone needs any assistance with that, feel free to reach out to me on Messenger, Facebook.
There you go. Yeah, if you got interest in the breed, check it out. There's a lot of resources for you. And Caden, I really appreciate you coming on and talking with us today. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the All About Pigeons podcast. Please help the pigeon hobby by telling your fellow club members or other pigeon friends about the podcast, and make sure to leave a good review or at least a 5-star for the podcast wherever you listen. If you have a topic or a person you want to hear more about on the podcast, or if you yourself would like to be a guest, just send an email to allaboutpigeonspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Hello and welcome to the All About Pigeons podcast. We have a very special episode for you today, so stick around.
Today's episode, we're going to be talking about fantails with Andrew Kearns. Andrew got his first pigeons when he was 4 years old, and 38 years later, pigeons are still playing a role in his life. He is a master breeder recognized by the National Pigeon Association, as well as the Eastern Fantail Club of America and Central Fantail Club of America. He is one of 3 to ever achieve 3 Master Breeder Awards for fantails. He has been involved in color genetics and has spent decades working on developing new colors in fantails. Most notable is the frill stencil colors. Over the years, he has held multiple offices in several fantail clubs as well as his all breed club. Andrew was the NPA state rep for Virginia for some years. He has done extensive judging assignments, judging every major show in North America, some multiple times, and was the first foreign judge for the Saudi Fantail Club. Next summer, he will judge 2 shows in South Africa. His birds and bloodlines are spread around the world and bred in 17 countries and on 4 continents. Andrew, thanks for coming on and talking fantails with us today.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
How did you get started with fantails? Was that one of the first breeds that you got into?
No, so like the vast majority of us, I think most people when they start in pigeons, either they have barn pigeons or commies, or you get your hands on some homers or some rollers. And in my case, my older brother and I got some rollers when I was just 4 years old, and we had a little kit box and played with them for a number of years. I saw my first fancy pigeons when I went to the State Fair of Virginia, and they had a pigeon show as part of the state fair. And I saw my first fantails and other fancy breeds. My brother and I had a little of everything in those days, and we begged and pleaded, and my parents said absolutely not. If you get rid of some stuff, maybe next year, if you're still interested, maybe we'll look at the fantails. Waited a year, fair came around again, begged and pleaded, and we landed up meeting a gentleman that lived only about 10 minutes from the house that was showing fantails at the state fair, and his name was Claude Ziegler, and he became the mentor slash grandfather that I never had. We were best of friends, and he taught me everything he knew about fantails, and I spent a lot of time with him in those early years, learning about the breed and showing, and was really a huge inspiration for me. So it was at age 12 that I actually got involved with breeding and showing fantails.
Excellent. Yeah, and there's that key again too. You hear about having a mentor and how helpful that really is when you first get started.
Absolutely.
So can you talk to us a little bit about the history and the origin of this breed?
Yeah. So fantails are one of the handful of really, really old breeds where there's no definitive start. The oldest pigeon literature mentions them. It's commonly believed that they were first developed in the Middle East. The first fantails that were documented that came to Europe via India through the Dutch traders. By the 1700s, you had fantails in Europe, and most notably England, where they started really trying to develop them into similar to what they are. By the 1800s, they had kind of a rough version of what we have today. By the 1840s, the first fantails had been imported into the U.S. from England, and they continued to do so till about the 1910 to 1915 range. They were still importing some birds, and the first clubs were being formed around that time here in the U.S. The Eastern Fantail Club, of which I'm an officer, was founded in 1896, making them the second oldest specialty club in the United States. We just celebrated our 125th anniversary show year before last. So fantails have a long history. They're known all around the world. A lot of old literature mentions them, but it was really, you have to credit the English in particular as kind of forming them into what we kind of recognize as a fantail today.
Since you do judging internationally, is there much difference between what the standard is in other countries and what the standard is here?
There was at one time, they kind of developed independently in different parts of the world. And even in Europe, if you look at fantails from, say, the 1970s to the early 80s, like what was shown in Germany, which is considered, one of the hotbeds of pigeons, the quality and the style of birds was very different than the United States. The US breeders in particular and the Canadian breeders did a fantastic job of developing the birds closer to the standard. So in the mid 1980s, a lot of North American birds went back to Europe and continued to do so for quite a stretch. So now you go to Europe and the birds are just the same as the States. If you go to Saudi Arabia, the birds are just the same. Like if I travel and when I'm judging these shows, if I didn't know what's outside the show hall, what city I was in, you'd swear it's just a show here in the States. The quality is very, very similar due to all the exports from North America around the world. A lot of the other countries adopted the US standard or became districts to some of the US clubs. So there's a lot of uniformity around the world as far as the type and style and level of quality.
This bird has pretty exaggerated features. It's pretty unique in a lot of different ways. And so as a judge and someone who's been breeding these for a while, can we first kind of just talk about some of these features that they have, and maybe even talk about a little bit of what you have to do for show prep for getting these birds ready for a show.
Sure. Obviously, the most notable feature people would say would be the tail, and then the posture would probably be a close second. A lot of people ask me, do they always stand like that or do they sleep like that? And the answer is no. But yeah, I always kind of liken it to a show dog where you have like a posture, like a German Shepherd doesn't stand that way all the time, but when he's in the show ring, he's got a certain posture and legs got to be a certain way. And the fantails are the same way. You bring out that natural inclination to show by working with them, but they're pretty much hatched with it. Interestingly enough, anatomically, if you looked at a skeleton of a fantail next to a skeleton of a roller or a homer, the only physical difference is the last tailbone, the caudal tailbone, is slightly lengthened because of the shape of the rump on a fantail. But that extreme posture and shape and everything that you see on it is all ligaments and attitude. There's really no anatomical difference. It's just all bred into them, that posture.
Yeah, they look a lot different than a roller or a homer when you
They absolutely do. They do. It's mostly feather, but it's a lot of selective breeding.
yeah.
They're quite a complicated breed because you have so many different parts to them, and the fact that you're so far away from the standard normal wild type, roller or homer body shape and posture. There's a lot that can not go right with them as far as the head setting. They have to keep their head straight, and if they look to one side, that's not good. Or if the feet aren't square, it's a contrast of extremes to produce a really good quality fantail. And then, unlike most breeds where you have a standard and it says 10 points for head and 20 points for body and whatever, the fantail standard has a performance section. So not only do they have 80 points for structure, but 20 points of the standard is how the bird physically performs. So they are considered a performing breed, just like a roller or a parlor roller or what have you. They have to perform a certain way in order to be graded properly. And if they don't perform correctly, then you're going to have a bird that's deficient.
Is that something that you kind of deal with in training? I guess getting like that's a breed that you would really have to show, get in a show cage and really train a lot with.
Yes, you spend quite a bit of time working with them, getting them very calm, used to being handled. They're always judged in communal cages, large walking pens. So they need to be used to being around strange birds, a lot of noise. We always use fluorescent lights on the cages. So training involves having a similar setup at home, maybe a radio in the room, for some background noise, and then lots of handling, lots of lacing of the tails, show prep, that kind of stuff.
Can you talk about the lacing of the tail?
Yeah. There's a few videos on YouTube that kind of describe the process, but essentially what you're doing is you're taking all the feathers and first you separate them all if they're tangled or overlapped, and you smooth them all out in a specific order. And then you're doing the actual art of lacing is you split the feather right at the base, the webbing, think of like a feather is almost like Velcro would have hooks and that lock feather veins together. So you would take your thumb and ever so slightly make a little split in the webbing and push part of the feather behind the feather that's above, leaving a little tiny piece at the base of the feather to hold it. And what it does is it locks those feathers into place. So instead of a bird with 35 loose feathers, just kind of, all over the place, it locks it into almost like that dinner plate shape with a little bit of massaging, a little twisting and smoothing and bending, whatnot. You can get a really flat, uniform, nice shaped tail. So there's a big showmanship side to fantails. Again, it's not just breeding a good one and that's good enough. It's the training and the showmanship, making sure the bird's trained, you got the tail laced. It all kind of goes hand in hand, making them really one of the more challenging show breeds.
Well, I mean, yeah, the lacing of the tail, clearly you have to handle that bird before it's showtime because that sounds like some delicate work.
Yeah, for sure. And you need to know every bird, every tail has trouble spots or something that needs to be corrected.
Mhm.
You almost never will have a perfect natural tail. So knowing in advance what each bird needs, making notes. So when you're at the show getting ready to have the bird judged, you kind of know, okay, well, it's got a little trouble spot here. I need to make sure this is correct, which is it's interesting because the Indian fantails, it's against their standard and they voted not to do it. They want the birds as is. They allow you to smooth the feathers and layer them, but not lock them together.
Oh,
So
interesting.
it's interesting that we go on different ends of the spectrum on that.
Being a bird that it gets handled a lot, are they a pretty docile bird or are they kind of wily?
Very, very, very docile. I have to be very careful when I'm in my pens because they won't get out the way. You don't want to step on someone. They're all up underneath your feet. They're very calm. People that visit the loft and look at the pens, they kind of laugh and say they're kind of like little bumper cars because they will. They're all running around on the floor. Specifically, fantail lofts really shouldn't have a lot of perches or especially anything up high. The more the birds fly, the more the tail is going to be scooped and you want a flat, nearly flat tail. So all my lofts have no perches at all. So it's just lots of floor space. So
Okay.
when you walk in a pen and there's, 50 in a pen just all running around. And they're very calm, and because they're handled quite a bit, especially to show bird, they're really good for kids because they're easy to pick up and easy to handle.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So your loft setup, you have so everything's on the ground then food, water, nest bowls.
Yeah. So I breed in individual cages. So my
Okay.
main loft has big open pens that I keep my cocks and hens separate, and I have pens for young birds during the breeding season that are just holding pens. And then I have individual breeding cages, especially with the genetic work with the colors. you really need to have good pedigrees, good records, and breeding in an open loft, you could, slip up. There could be some mistakes made. So
Yeah.
having one pair per cage, ensuring the parentage is more ideal for what I do. So with the fantails, I keep 50 pair in individuals, which is a lot of little cups of food and water every day to change. And even then, they're just large cages with a nest bowl in the corner. There's no perches or anything in the cages. So really, my birds don't get an opportunity to fly much at all.
I mean, how much can they really fly?
As a kid, I've had a few get away from me, showing friends in the neighborhood or whatever. And I can honestly say they can get up to the roof of the house with a little bit of effort. So they're not going to be setting any records. Or you're not going to have a kid of fantails flying around the roof of the house. But if they try hard enough, yeah, they could get up into a tree or up on a roof with a little effort. It's like trying to fly with a parachute behind you. It's a bit of a task for them.
So when it comes to the breeding, and we spoke with Spud about the Indian fantails, and we talked a little bit about the trimming of the fantails. What's the process for trimming the fantails for the standards, and getting those guys ready?
It's going to be very similar. So to ensure the fertility rate, which is not great, various studs and strains of fantails have different fertility rates. But for me, if I'm like 65, 70% for a year, that's good for me. Where, most breeds are nearly 100%. You need to trim the sides. At least I try and basically just leave a little bit in the middle to kind of mimic the width of like a roller or a homer. So like 3 or 4 feathers wide right in the middle, and everything on the sides comes off. Trim it as tight as I can, and then I trim the fluff around the vent because fantails tend to be kind of fluffy in that area and longer feathered, to try and ensure as much fertility as I can. There's pairs that can get it done with no trimming at all. It's just, I don't want to take the time to wait and see, give them a few rounds to see. And, it's all about production. Raising a good fantail is not easy, like a real top show quality bird. Your rate of getting a really good one, like in my stud, is maybe 1 out of 20 is really nice. So you don't want to waste time waiting to see if the fertility is there.
Do you ever have to foster?
I do. I don't foster all of them. So for example, I breed from usually 50 pair of fantails, and I'll keep 15 pairs of rollers in a feeder loft, and I'll foster out eggs here and there. But it's not a necessity. Fantails are very good parents for the most part. The fertility is not wonderful, but they're very attentive parents for the most part. They feed the babies really well. Never had an issue with that. Not like a short face breed that may physically have limitations on feeding babies. So,
Right.
Fantails are really good parents.
And I'm just curious because I hear different people have different breeds for fosters. What kind of drew you to using rollers for foster parents?
So I've had homers in the past, and they ate a little too much for my liking. And then because I'm into working with genetics and the rare colors, I had the opportunity to get some rollers and frill stencil and some of the odd colors. And I thought, well, it cost as much to feed 15 pair of blue checkers as it would 15 pair of almonds and stencils and all these rare, pretty colors. So I kind of, that fed that curiosity and that passion for working with colors in a group. And rollers, of course, are easy as can be to breed. You don't have to do much to raise a bunch of them. So, just a variety of colors, and playing with them on the side gives kind of a vibrant group of feeders instead of just your normal kind of standard colored birds.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about some of the color work that you're doing with these fantails? I know that you're really into the genetic side of it there.
Yeah, it started, well, it's way back. So you got to picture, I'm in, at the time, 7th grade. And so that would be middle school. And we're in science class, and we're studying in life science, Gregor Mendel in pea pods, and learning the basics of genetics with doing a Punnett square and plugging in your genes. Well, lo and behold, at the same time, getting into pigeons, and a friend in my local Albury club loaned me a copy of Joe Quinn's Pigeon Breeder's Notebook, which is kind of the gateway for most of us genetics breeders. That's the first book that was really written on the subject at the time. And it just fascinated me. I was learning about it in school. And then I was like, well, I can use that same principles towards my pigeons. And oh, well, that's how you can make this color or that color. You just need one of this and one of that. And this is how it works. And it took all the mystery out of how to get the colors. So that's where I kind of got the bug for it. And then down the road, I started meeting some guys that had done some breed crosses and really worked with some new genes that weren't in fantails. So my first real project was I crossed Argent Modinas into fantails to get the toy stencil gene, and was pretty successful at that, building a family of birds off of that. And then after that, I started with some reduced and barless, which weren't in the breed at the time, and even brown. Just the regular brown pigment wasn't in fantails up until the 1980s. And then most notably, I worked with a group that we called ourselves the Gene Pool. And it was a group of fantail guys that were all about working with colors. And we all worked with the frill stencil for a number of years. And there's still a couple of us still hanging in there, but it's been 1992 was the original cross from Oriental frill to a fantail. And here we are all these years later. They're quite beautiful and getting developed nicely. And that's really the one that people really gravitate to as far as the rare colored fantails, because frill stencils are very, very, very complicated and difficult gene to transfer when you have to worry about the posture and the body shape and the tail,
Right.
that sort of thing. It's much easier if you were to put it on a roller or a racing homer and you didn't have to worry about all the other stuff. So it took nearly a decade to get something that even looked like a half-breed fantail in frill stencil, and then it took another decade to get something that looked like a very poor quality fantail on a frill stencil. So it's very slow. You're talking, it was a group of us that raised hundreds upon hundreds over these years, and we would trade the very best of what we had extra with each other to kind of help each other along. And they've come an amazing long way. And then we started spreading them around, and now they're all over the Middle East and even Asia now. I sent some to Bangladesh, and they're in India and
Wow.
yeah, South Africa. So it's kind of neat to see something that you had a hand in as far as developing, and it's literally, you could see the descendants all around the world. But the frill stencils are definitely the big one. Another one I'm working on pretty hard is ice. The same color as a damascene or an ice pigeon. A friend of mine spent about 20 years working on it, and when he decided to hang it up with fantails and get out of pigeons, he asked me to take the last 5 pair that he had to kind of carry on. And I've had a good time, though. I guess it's been about 8 years now, trying to bring them up to type and working with them. And they're not quite as hard as the frill stencils, but they're definitely challenging and a very beautiful color. Fantails in particular, I always say that they're in the pigeon world, fantails are one of the best canvases to use for a color geneticist, because you have that huge tail, you have all those feathers, that are on display. So they really do make a good canvas for developing these colors. You don't have to spread the tail out to see the expression. It's right there, prancing around. So
That's so cool. I mean, it's what I really enjoy is, just the variety of pigeons that we have through selective breeding. And here we are today, I mean, thousands of years later, and the breeds are still being manipulated through selective breeding and changing and enhancing them, and we can still play that role. That's really cool.
It is. And a lot of it goes back to the organizations that support these breeds. They update the standards, and the members, get together. And the last revision on fantails was 2006. It's nice to kind of keep setting goals for the breed and all breeds, and continue to change them and watch them evolve for various reasons. Yeah, it's really a fascinating thing.
So you've been a member of the different fantail clubs here in the States. There's the Eastern Fantail Club and the Central Fantail Club, and you also judge internationally. Other international clubs as well?
Yep. So fantails are one of the few breeds that's fortunate enough in North America, a healthy enough breed to have a lot of regional clubs. For example, like frillbacks that I raise. There's the American Frillback Club, and that's pretty much caters to the breed in the US and in North America. Where the fantails, there's the Eastern Fantail Club, the Western Fantail Club, the Central Fantail Club, the Mid America Fantail Club. The Great Lakes Fantail Club sponsors the show at Louisville for the National Youngbird Show. And then there's this very strong club in Canada, the Central Canadian Fantail Club. So we all tend to cooperate, and we'll have combined shows, and we work more together in recent years. But the breed's healthy enough that there's quite a few regional clubs. So we don't have one national club, as opposed to we still have quite a few regional clubs. And most of us are members of multiple clubs, or all of them. And then the overseas clubs are usually affiliated with the North American clubs. Like the European clubs are all districts of the Central Fantail Club of America, due to if you've ever seen the European shows or read about them, like Nuremberg or Leipzig in Germany, the big BBC shows, the shows are judged prior to the opening of the show to the public, right? And all the birds are judged in their cages. And the day before the show opens to the public, everything's judged, and you have a catalog. Well, if you think about that, if the exhibitors aren't allowed in there, then that's not really how we do fantails, right?
Oh,
That's
right.
an opposite. So in order for the European organizations to allow that break in tradition, to allow the exhibitors to prepare their own birds and have a show set up like the typical North American way, they have to be affiliated with the North American clubs. So that's why the European fantail breeders are all, that group is affiliated with the Central Fantail Club of America. They're districts of that particular club, to allow them to have separate shows and have the exhibitors prepare their birds and judge them in a communal pen per the North American standard. But the Saudi club is very vibrant and been going for, I guess they've been around about 15 years or so. Strong clubs. There's a nice group of guys in Australia that I'm friendly with, and the South Africans as well. And the Middle East has become a hotbed of pigeon activity and fantails, especially the last say 2 decades or so. It's really growing.
Will you be showing your birds at the NPA National up in Oklahoma this year?
This year, probably not. There's a big fantail show about 2 weeks before in Indiana, and I'm in the East Coast in Virginia. So in 2021 was the last year the NPA went to Amarillo. I drove, what was it, 25 hours from Central Virginia to Amarillo, Texas to show my birds. So I've made the trip out west for the NPA. That was like 1,550 miles each way.
Wow.
That was a long trip. But this year, probably not. The NPA's been nice enough that they've kind of had some eastern half of the US shows in recent years. Like,
Right.
for example, I was at Myrtle Beach, and then of course this last year in Louisville, Kentucky. I've shown at multiple when they did in the Northeast, like Springfield, Massachusetts, Hartford, Connecticut, and then the multiple ones in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. But Oklahoma City, that's quite a hike. That's about a 22 and a half, 23-hour drive for me. And 2 weeks after a major show, I'm probably going to sit this one out.
Yeah, I get it. That's a drive. You know, out here on the West Coast, we appreciate it when they move around a little bit and kind of come closer
Yeah.
for us. It makes it, you know, on the other side of it a little bit easier to get to. So
Yeah, I mean, you can't please everyone, but I
right,
think
yep,
really if the NPA does a good job of moving the site around every few years so everyone gets an opportunity in different
yeah,
parts of the
absolutely. Well, we're coming up against the clock, but Andrew, thanks for coming on and talking with us. You've been a wealth of information and really appreciate you sharing it all with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the All About Pigeons podcast. Please help the pigeon hobby by telling your fellow club members or other pigeon friends about the podcast, and make sure to leave a good review or at least a 5-star for the podcast wherever you listen. If you have a topic or a person you want to hear more about on the podcast, or if you yourself would like to be a guest, just send an email to allaboutpigeonspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.